China. I said maybe it's a secret plan. She could go to China, wreck their economy, and then come back here, and then we might all be
if
better
anyone
off.
could do it, it is Rachel.
It's down to her. She's taken Andrew Bailey with her as well, the world's most useless Bank of England chairman. So, I mean, I think
I didn't know. I think Mark Carney can give him a run for his money.
Oh, true. Yeah, that's right. He might be running Canada soon as well. Can you imagine that?
That's going to be
Blimey. Anyway, listen, it's all happening.
All that happy news.
Oh, it's great. The fires are still burning everywhere, not just in California. I'm Mike Graham. Julia Hartley-Brewer next. I'll see you tomorrow at 6 a.m.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
A very good morning to you. This is Talk, the home of common sense, with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. Pleasure to have your company once again. Quite a lot to talk about today. Funny that. Whether you're listening on DAB Plus Radio or on your smart speaker, watching on YouTube or on your connected device, it'd be great to have your company. Great also if you wanted to get in touch about any of the big topics we're talking about. In particular, the Chancellor Rachel Reeves drawing up contingency plans, we're told, for emergency spending cuts or, let's face it, tax rises in March as the government borrowing costs have soared higher than after Liz Truss's mini-budget in 2022. They're back to sort of 2007 levels. This, by the way, as Liz Truss, the former Prime Minister, has sent extraordinarily a legal cease and desist letter to the Prime Minister, urging him, well, demanding that he stops claiming she crashed the economy on the basis she didn't. There's no evidence for that. Given that the figures on borrowing or the cost of borrowing are actually higher now than they were under Liz Truss, it's a bit sodding rich, is it not, of the Prime Minister to claim that Liz Truss was part of the problem? She lost her job. Liz Truss, still Chancellor of the Exchequer. I would love to hear your thoughts on that. Also going to be talking about Donald Trump's incoming terror chief. You've heard him on this show many times, Seb Gorka. He said the UK should be taking back British members of Islamic State, including none other than Shamima Begum, as they languish in Syrian prison camps. Not quite sure we want to do that. Plus, of course, we'll be talking more about that vote last night on the grooming gangs inquiry. Labour MPs voted down a Tory demand for the new national inquiry into the rape gangs. Also, Labour's latest plan to smash the people smuggling gangs. Today's plan, Foreign Secretary David Lammy is announcing tough new financial sanctions on Channel boat kingpins in a bid to cripple networks, because apparently they think that all of the payments, all the money that goes through those systems is all going through, you know, Lloyds Bank backs payments as opposed to in big wads of cash. I don't know how they think this is going to work. Apparently they're the first country to try and do it. Yes, maybe that's because no one else thought it was a good idea because it wouldn't work, David. Just throwing that out there to your Foreign Secretary. Anyway, this is Talk. Welcome to the home of common sense. Big welcome also to Philip Ingram, former senior military intelligence officer, here to talk sense on everything, as he always does today. Very good morning to you, sir.
I didn't get the memo to say to bring sense with me. Oh, dear. Oh, well.
I think it just comes with you naturally. I think it's just in the aura. I think,
it's genetically included.
We refuse to have anyone in that seat who doesn't talk common sense. Well, pretty much, she says. But anyway, I'm going to ask you, obviously, about the market turmoil, but I'd love to ask someone a specific question going out today. But as you know, phone lines are always open, messages are always open on anything you want to have your say on. You get to decide what we talk about as much as we do. Chancellor Rachel Reeves may have to make emergency spending cuts or raise more taxes. This is in March, when she's basically going to be making, a spending statement and looking at the spending review. In June, they're going to set out plans for departmental spending. There's a lot of, departments basically saying, no, I need money, no, I need money. Everyone wants more money. And costs, the inflationary costs, the national insurance costs, minimum wage costs, that has boosted the cost of every department and everything that they fund as well. Those costs, as we know, every private business is having that issue, which is why we are seeing so much hesitancy in the economy right now, because lots of companies choosing not to take people on and even laying people off. But government borrowing costs have soared higher than after the 2022 mini-budget from Kwasi Kwarteng and Liz Truss. That was, mayhem. Media didn't stop talking about it. Liz Truss, Kwasi Kwarteng both lost their jobs as a result of that. Keir Starmer, Rachel Reeves, still in their jobs. Barely mentioned on the BBC. Barely mentioned. Very concerned about people, very rich people in California losing their homes to wildfires. They're very concerned about that. Barely any mention of the fact the cost of a 10-year gilt in this country, a 30-year gilt, has gone sky high, and that means an extra £10 billion a year that we don't have being spent on interest costs, possible spending cuts to vital public services, or more tax rises to strangle our economy. Barely a mention. I'd love to hear your reaction to that. I have a funny feeling I might have a clue what it might be. Give us your reaction. I want to hear from you. Liz Truss, Kwasi Kwarteng, if you are listening, give us a call. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. You can text the word talk in your message to 87222. Get in touch with us on X at talkTV. Don't forget, of course, that calls are charged at the national rate. Text costs £1, standard network rate message. Philip Ingram, it is extraordinary. Genuinely, BBC, 15 minutes yesterday and today, all their leading news programmes this morning, all about the California wildfires. OK, 5 people have died, 100,000 people moved. That's awful. It involves celebrities. Yeah, I get that. But 15 minutes until there was a vague mention in very sort of technical terms about this massive issue with basically the fiscal headroom, as it's known. It's a load of absolute nonsense, this concept, by the way, that the Chancellor has basically gone in a moment, with an extra £10 billion a year cost of servicing our massive multi-trillion-pound debt.
Yeah, well, the OBR, after the
Office for Budget Responsibility.
Yeah, Office for Budget Responsibility. After the last Chancellor's statement, her little budget, turned around and proved that the government was not going to achieve, on its original statistics, the 2.5% growth that everything is predicated on. Every policy that the Labour government's got is predicated on a 2.5% growth, and OBR said over 10 years it's not going to happen. Now we've got another hit against that, and therefore their plans, which they don't have because they didn't do any planning whatsoever, but the feed into all of these studies and reviews and everything else that they're doing is in an even worse position. I don't know how they can get out of this.
It's a circle that it's not going to be squared.
No.
That is certainly the case.
And before the election, we were back on a path to growth again.
Yeah.
They've destroyed that path.
Vaguely.
Vaguely.
A tiny little bit.
But you know, the way economics is around the world, you have to go very, very small and begin to build. But
with more hikes possibly likely, we don't know what's going to happen in case there are tariffs from Donald Trump. And I know David Lammy this morning, the Foreign Secretary, playing very nicely, refused to criticise Donald Trump. We'll talk about that a bit later. But you know, desperate to kowtow. But I mean, also crucially, food prices. We know energy prices. Oh yes. They're not going up at the same rate. The rate of increase, they're not going down. They're not going to go
going
back.
up.
They're not going back to what they were in 2020. That's not happening, guys. They're still sky high. And we've got, again, millions of pensioners, lowest incomes, losing their winter fuel allowance of £300 a year. But, I mean, things everyone has to pay for. Energy. Yep. You know, the basic bills. We know water bills are going up. All of that. But food. You know, people need to buy. That's not an option. That's not, shan't I buy a Ryanair flight this summer? That's, do I need to eat? Yeah, the answer is always yes to that. Food prices are going to rise. Retail bodies, including the British Retail Consortium, have warned. Food prices increased by an average of 4.2% in the latter half of the year. Now, I mean, again, you know, that is another massive increase. When inflation was at 11.1% a couple of years ago, we still were seeing increases in food prices, in some cases, you know, 30% plus.
And it's, you know, it's destroying it at its beginning in our farms. It's destroying the ability to import food because of the increased costs that there are associated with that. Then to distribute and sell the food, the increased staff costs that there are around that. You know, at every stage, the government has set the conditions to increase.
I don't think they even. I mean, genuinely, when they did not just the national insurance payments by contributions by employers going up, but also lowering the threshold at which people pay to about £4,000. It just meant that there was just it's £25 billion more raised in tax specifically from employers. Specifically from employers for hiring people. Again, I've always got it literally. The word literally being used, a jobs tax. And they seem to be utterly surprised and shocked. The idea that employers might then go, I'm not going to give pay rises to my staff because the cost of employment has gone up. I'm not going to employ more people because I can't afford to employ more people at the margins, and I'm probably going to have to let some people go because I can't afford. Those people don't necessarily give that much extra value to my business, and therefore they're now a cost, not a benefit on the margins. I mean, if any of the people in the cabinet had ever, or in the Treasury, had ever run a business, big or small, I don't care whether you've run a multi-million-pound, international business, or whether you've run a corner shop, understanding stuff vaguely more than some idiot bimbo on the Celebrity Apprentice, you would understand the marginal costs of employing one extra person, and they don't.
Well, they haven't got a clue, and it's all down to the P word. Here's where you get very nervous as to which. I mean, I am getting nervous. Get ready with the dump button, everybody. It's profit. They don't understand profit. They automatically, psychologically translate profit into big wads of cash going to the CEO's pocket. It's evil. Instead of recognising that profit is used for growth, it's used to increase the number of employees. It's used to increase wages in shops.
To buy a new shop, a new factory.
To build on the business. And only if that's successful will a board then turn around and say, hey, CEO, you're doing really, really well. We're going to give you, and shareholders, we're going to give you our share of the profits.
Most companies aren't even like that. They're small and medium-sized enterprises.
And you don't make profit.
80-90% of people in this country are employed by those sorts of businesses. Again, I'd just love to hear your reaction to this, because I just find it extraordinary. The free pass that Rachel Reeves has been given on this, absolutely extraordinary. What spending cuts would you expect? What more tax rises would you expect? We're told it's more likely to be spending cuts, but I think it'll be a bit of both.
Well,
and again, they always say they've got no money. It's like, well, yeah, but you seem to have the money for the train drivers. You seem to have the money for paying, I mean, we'll come on to this in a moment, the Mauritius to give, I don't get this, to give away the Chagos Islands. We're paying for the privilege. Got money for this, like £22 billion carbon nonsense, climate stuff, paying money to overseas countries to tackle climate change for them. A load of stuff that's utter waste of time, utter nonsense, just going into the pockets of rich green companies and kleptocratic leaders. But it is, I mean, very rarely I'm speechless, but oh my God, they are so bad at being in government.
Well, Rachel from accounts is such a good economist. Yeah, well, she's got so much.
She's as good an economist as she is a chess prodigy. Well, I mean, this is the other extraordinary story. I mean, this is genuinely extraordinary. Liz Truss, the former Prime Minister, has sent, this is a legal letter, okay, lawyers acting on behalf of the former Prime Minister, sent a cease and desist letter to Keir Starmer, the current Prime Minister, demanding that he stops making claims that she crashed the economy. Yeah. The Telegraph has seen a copy of this lawyer. The letter argues that the statement is false and defamatory and suggests the assertions from Keir Starmer before the general election may have contributed to her losing her battle to be re-elected as the MP for South West Norfolk. Basically, her mini budget back in September 2022. I remember being, when we were talking about it, and we were at Tory party conference when it was all going off, and financial markets reacted very negatively because there were major tax cuts funded by borrowing, and of course, the vast amounts of the extra borrowing was to pay for covering people's energy bill costs. And again, a lot of that down to not just what happened in Ukraine and sanctions on Russia, but actually down to absurd, insane energy policy carried out with the Tory government. So they got themselves into that mess just as much. But the legal letter argues that the financial movements didn't amount to an economic crash because there was no fall in economic output, no rise in unemployment, and so it didn't count as an economic crash. It's not true. But given where we are right now, with the cost of government debt and servicing that debt, paying the interest, rising to higher than it was in September 2022 under Liz Truss, I mean, it's extraordinary that Keir Starmer's throwing those claims around still. Oh,
very much so. And what happened under Liz Truss, primarily down to the City of London, but it was a short, sharp shock. It didn't create a long-term issue. Yeah. What's happening now is a long-term policy that is creating a very, very long-term issue. And it's the same way that if you get radical surgery to cut out a cancer and you get rid of it, it's harsh at the time, but you've got rid of the disease.
It was badly politically done.
Exactly, and she was pushed on. But if you don't do that, if you let it grow very, very slowly, which is what this government's doing, it will destroy the body. I'd
love to hear your reaction to that as well. Do give us a call on that one, 0344 499 1000. Let's also talk about that vote last night in the House of Commons, as we expected. Tory call for a national inquiry into grooming gangs, voted down by Labour. I thought Keir Starmer and Kemi Badenoch both did good performances at PMQs. Yep. I was on air when it was on. I went back and watched some of it back. I don't normally bother to do that, I've got to be honest. But again, I thought Kemi Badenoch made very strong arguments about joining the dots and why we need to have that proper inquiry. And Keir Starmer, I mean, a lot of personal digs. Like, you never said there's anything in the House on this one. But she's been front bencher. It wasn't her remit, and she wasn't in the Home Office, etc. But she has given speeches about this issue. But he sort of defended his record as well. But I mean, the reality is, I mean, the Labour got a bit soft on this. I think their pressure is mounting and they will have to have an inquiry. But I think one of the key points people like Chris Philp, the Shadow Home Secretary, and Kemi Badenoch have made, it doesn't have to be an inquiry or more prosecutions and more efforts to stop what's going on. You can do both at the same time.
Yeah, very much so. And the Children's Wellbeing in Schools Bill that everyone was saying is there to protect children. Actually, when you read the detail of it, it is dumbing education in England down to the lowest common denominator. Yeah. Labour did that whenever they brought in comprehensive education many years ago and got rid of grammar schools and secondary schools and everything else.
Tell me about it.
And that's what this bill's all about. The Tories, I think, knew that bringing this amendment in would never pass. But the fact that
it wasn't on record, so he can say at the next election.
Exactly, and it's created the debate that's going on at the minute, which is really important. But what I don't get is the fact that there was a 3-line whip for the Labour Party to vote against it.
MPs were basically told you lose the whip if you do not vote with the government.
Yet our Prime Minister, our Deputy Prime Minister, and our Chancellor didn't vote. There often are deals where, like, if you're busy, you're at an event, you're doing something else that you get to pass it, and MPs are what's called the pairing system. Yeah. But you would think on an issue like this, that those at the very top, the top three didn't lead by example.
Absolutely. There's all this fuss also about this grooming gang phrase being racist. This definition of Islamophobia, the Labour Party has formally adopted from the all-party parliamentary group on this some years back. It was chaired by Wes Streeting, now the Health Secretary, of course. But back in 2019, Labour Party adopted the definition and examples set out in a report, which basically talked about what Islamophobia actually was. But it included warnings that talking about Asian grooming gangs was just a modern iteration of age-old stereotypes and tropes about Islam. and it could heighten the vulnerability of Muslims to hate crimes. I mean, we have that sort of talk when everyone talks about an Islamist terror attack. Oh, but, let's all sing Don't Look Back in Anger and Light a Candle, because we don't want any hate against Muslims. I mean, look, there are people who will use any event by anybody of a particular colour or a different religion as an excuse for, frankly, violence and abuse and hatred. That is not the majority of people in this country by a long way. But there is a real concern that, and Kemi Badenoch raised this yesterday, that, if talking about people who are Asian sex groomers, these Pakistani sex groomers is an example of Islamophobia. That's exactly why people didn't tell the truth, why people like Anne Cryer and Sarah Champion, two Labour MPs who did raise this issue, were basically labelled as racist. And Andrew Norfolk, the reporter from The Times, who was so wary about writing this in the first place, because everyone shouted racist at him.
There's nothing racist about the fact that, because it's a fact, these child rape gangs, I hate the word grooming, my dog goes for grooming, child rape gangs were primarily Pakistani Muslim men. Full stop. Those are accurate labels.
From actually a very small part.
Yes,
of
a very small part, and a very small part of Pakistan. And you put it into the overall statistics of the number of child abuse cases there are across the UK, it is a relatively small statistic. But the fact that the horrific attacks this particular group carried out over a long period of time, and the cover-ups because of people's sensitivities. The key thing was they were not arrested and prosecuted because of their ethnicity and their religion.
Exactly. Let's just talk just finally about the latest NHS figures that have come out in the last hour. And we are seeing that, and I know Mike Graham announced this just after 9:30, that last year, 2023, saw the busiest year on... 2024, sorry, I get confused. Yes. Busiest year on record for A&E and ambulance services. Flu continuing to pile pressure on hospitals, with an average of 5,407 patients a day in hospital with flu last week, 256 of those in critical care. It's 3.5 times higher than the same week last year. But again, we have different rates of flu different years. Sometimes we lose, 10,000 people to flu. Sometimes we lose 5,000 people to flu.
Sometimes we lose millions. Spanish flu.
Well, exactly. This is what happens. I mean, again, I hate to tell it to people, but before 2020, people did still die. But a number of trusts this week, I think more than 20 have declared critical incidents. But the crucial thing is they're saying, more people in. But the reality is, if we get a bad flu bug, and we know that lots of bugs like RSV and flu and others have come back with a vengeance because they were sort of dampened down because the COVID was the dominant bug for a couple of years. COVID's still around as well. But we also have an ageing population. I mean, we're going to have to expect that we're going to have more people who are critically hurt by these sorts of bugs, because it is largely the elderly who are most at risk. We have more elderly people. My parents, baby boomer generation, now in their early 80s, they are, they're prime candidates for this. And there are more older people. There will be more demand on A&E. Why is the government, why is the NHS, why is everybody surprised, not just by January every year, by winter diseases every year, but also by the fact that the demographics that we've been seeing for 60 years, 80 years, show that there are going to be more old people and therefore greater demand. And
there's two other factors in here. It's very difficult to get a GP's appointment unless you book 3 months ahead. But the other thing is the out-of-hours doctor services that there are in different areas are co-located with A&Es. My local one is co-located with the A&E. So you walk in, you book into A&E, you get triaged by a paramedic. You then get to see a nurse, and the nurse decides whether you go into the proper emergency bit of A&E or you go and see the duty GP that they've got there. And therefore, to see a GP, you have to get booked in and become an A&E statistic. What a surprise.
Again, and if people can't get help anywhere else, where do you think they're going to end up going? Or if it's like my local hospital, I mean, whenever I've gone for an appointment, I had some allergy testing, and I had to go to A&E. I mean, the vast majority of people in there don't speak English as a first language. I don't admit that's just a London thing, but I mean, literally, the vast majority.
No, it's across the country.
Now, they may be British citizens now. They've been totally entitled to use the NHS, but the vast majority clearly speaking with foreign accents.
And then interpreters have to be called in for them, and it takes more time for the doctors and nurses to go through and treat them.
But it's just like, we're told, like, oh, well, thank God for all these people who are coming from abroad to work on our NHS. Maybe we wouldn't need quite so many if there weren't so many people here living from abroad. I know we want to be a big, big international city and everything, an international country, but there comes a point where you just go, really? Like, I'm in my capital city, and I'm one of the few people in this waiting room who speaks English as a first language. I think that's strange. I think that's something that's worth sort of looking into. But there we are. Philip Ingram, always, as I said, great to have your company and all your common sense. Lots more we didn't get to. I know you've got strong views on the Chagos Islands because we've just got to spare $9 billion to give to the Mauritians while we give them, not even give them back, just give them the Chagos Islands. They never owned them. They're ours. But we'll talk about that. We'll talk about many other topics coming up. And I want to get to your calls, particularly about Rachel Reeves, apparently crashing the economy. Not a story on the BBC. Massive issue when it's Liz Truss, apparently, although she says she didn't. She sent a cease and desist letter, a legal letter to the Prime Minister saying, stop saying I crashed the economy, I didn't, it's defamatory. Love to hear your thoughts. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. Lots of top guests coming up, lots of great calls coming up. Stay tuned.
This man who leads our country should be so out of touch with how the people that he is supposed to represent feel. I am rarely really triggered by politicians. I spend all my time listening to their verbiage. But that comment actually really gets me because it is so insulting to voters. It's so insulting to all those children who were abused.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is indeed Talk, the Home of Common Sense, for me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. 10:28 is the time. Philip Ingram's still with me. Delighted to be joined now by Vernon, who's on the line from Staffordshire. He's given us a call on 0344 499 1000, as you can, to have his say on Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, possibly having to make contingency plans, we're told, to make emergency spending cuts or raise more taxes. Yeah, because we can really afford to pay more taxes, as the government borrowing costs have soared higher than after Liz Truss's 2022 mini-budget. Vernon, what do you have to say?
Julia, that magic money tree that Labour always produce, guess what? It's not there, is it?
Well, those leaves have fallen off pretty fast, haven't they?
When you have Rachel from Accounts, who's an economist, who isn't an economist. But why are we surprised, Julia? Yeah. This is what Labour always do. I blame everybody that voted Labour. Labour are doing what Labour always do. Public services, they just give money to all the people that actually don't generate money. Yeah. And they destroy business. That's what they do.
I mean, that budget in October... Yeah, the budget in October was extraordinary for how bad it was in terms of, the money that went to, again, we already money paid out to train drivers and stuff. No shortage of train drivers. You don't have to pay them a lot more to keep them. Doesn't take 20 years to train them up either. And yet putting literally a tax on jobs at a time when, you want to boost the economy was insane.
Julia, it's for the birds. You cannot spend the money that you don't have. But by the same token...
Hold on a minute. No, that's not true, Vernon. Governments have always spent money they don't have and they borrow it. The question is the cost of the borrowing.
OK, put it another way. You do not stifle the cash cow, Julia.
Yeah.
A business generates the money that governments can spend or can borrow.
Yeah.
By stifling business, guess what? You don't have the money, and guess what? That magic money tree becomes reality, and you have to borrow. But as I say, I blame every single person that voted for Labour, because they're doing what they always do. They are bankrupting the economy, and it's people like me have to pick up the pieces.
What about the people... What about, Vernon, the people who didn't vote Labour, but didn't vote Conservative, knowing that the only two viable options at the time in July were either a Labour or a Tory government, chose to either not vote, as about 3 or 4 million people did, or chose to vote Reform, as about 3 or 4 million people did?
Well, like a lot of things, is that it's a protest vote. And again, they're at fault. Because if you protest, you end up with, people like this who have no idea of business.
She's an economist, mate. Didn't you read the memo?
No, she wasn't.
She was an economist. She just wasn't an economist at HBOS. She was an economist at the Bank of England.
Julia, she was a bean counter. That is all she was. She counted beans at the Bank of England.
And I'm guessing not very accurately as well. I'm not sure I would trust her. Can I ask you about what you think about Liz Truss posting this legal cease and desist letter to the Prime Minister saying, stop saying I crashed the economy, it's defamatory?
Well, she's right, though, isn't it? But, if you look at the House of Commons, you look at Westminster, the House of Parliament, it's a joke, Julia, isn't it? We're meant to live in a democracy. And last night there was a vote, a democratic vote, and MPs were not allowed to vote as a democracy.
No, that is not true. With a whipping system is part of our parliamentary system. MPs were entirely capable of voting for that inquiry. If they were a Labour MP, they would just lose the Labour whip. They'd still be an MP, they'd still get paid.
But Julia, they didn't.
They didn't. But that's not. But it wasn't an attack on our democracy. It's literally how every government every government of every hue whips their MPs to vote in line with their policy. I mean,
Julia, democracy is very much under threat. We have a situation in this country to this date, nationally, we have white young girls who are being raped.
Yep.
They did it in 2008. And to this day, it continues.
They've been doing it for over 20 years.
This continues to the top. And guess what? He won't have an investigation. I don't want an inquiry, because 7 years is 7 years too long. 7 minutes this would take. You have people who are guilty, who have dual national citizenship, and they should be deported.
Yeah,
it should be started tomorrow.
I'm with you all the way on that. With you all the way on that. I don't know why they were given dual nationality. I just do wonder, why on earth were there people who clearly were born in Pakistan who were living here? That's why they've got dual nationality, a lot of them. Why on earth were these people here in the first place? Who thought it was a great idea to import a load of people to run kebab shops and drive minicabs, which is what a lot of these men were doing? I mean, what were they realistically adding to our economy and adding to the the good of this country? You've got to wonder why these people were allowed to come to this country in the first place. Vernon, thank you very much indeed for that. It's 10:33. We're going to take a quick break. We're going to be talking to independent economist and big supporter of Liz Truss, Julian Jessup, about this economic situation. We're also going to be talking about David Lammy's latest effort, today's effort to smash the gangs, stop the boats. This time, it's basically about sanctions on those kingpins running those Channel migrant gangs, because apparently all payments for people doing smuggling gangs are going through, their Lloyd's account, where they put it through BACS, and it's all recorded, and they've got their little checkbook stubs probably, and it's all really easy to do those sanctions on those people because their assets are all in their name. And it's really so painful, isn't it? It's not going to smash the gangs, Foreign Secretary. We'll talk about all of that coming up. This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Very good morning to you. This is Talk, the Home of Common Sense, with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. Philip Ingram, former senior military intelligence officer, is also still with me. Before this half hour is out, I do want to talk to you about the Chagos Islands.
Yes.
I know you're desperate to talk about this because apparently we've got to spare $9 billion to give Mauritius as part of have an island. Oh, which we own, you never owned. Oh, and have £9 billion of our taxpayers' money here too, because we've got loads of money, we've got loads of spare money, or have we? Because it turns out that crashing the economy is well on the way to where we are going with the results of the last budget from Rachel Reeves from last October. These extraordinary spending cuts that we've seen, extraordinary tax rises that we've seen, have done nothing to boost growth. Absolutely the opposite, in fact. Nothing to boost employment. Absolutely opposite, in fact. And they've also done nothing to help the cost of servicing our debt, which is now at a cost far higher than it was in 2022 when we had Liz Truss's mini budget, which we're told crashed the economy. Well, let's talk to Julian Jessup, who's an independent economist, about this. And I think, Julian, fair to say you were a big fan of what Liz Truss had to announce in that 2022 budget. What do you make of where we are financially, economically right now?
Well, I'm going to be careful what I say because I don't want to receive a legal letter from Rachel Reeves.
We'll come to that, yes.
If anybody has crashed the economy, I think it's clearly Rachel Reeves rather than Liz Truss. It is fair to say that the 2022 mini budget landed badly in the bond markets, but that was partly because of underlying problems that the Bank of England had not been on top of in the pensions market in particular. The Bank of England also at that point was starting to sell bonds, which was putting upward pressure on borrowing costs as well. So I wouldn't give Liz Truss a completely free pass, but I think looking at what's happening now, it's arguably much more serious. Liz Truss's mini budget at least went down well with businesses and was seen as positive for growth. Whereas what we've seen over the last few months is a complete collapse in business confidence. And investors have lost confidence as well. They're worried that none of this is going to work, that we're just going to have to end up with more tax increases, that it's going to be a lot more boring. That means more bonds have to be sold, and that means that their yields are going to have to be higher. And we could end up in the dreaded doom loop where the economy just slides further, taxes have to go up more, spending is cut, confidence is lost, and then we're back back in stage one again.
Yeah, well, indeed. I mean, this is the thing. We're told that Rachel Reeves had kept what's called his fiscal headroom. I mean, when you're in like multi-trillion pounds worth of debt, you don't really have your fiscal headroom. It's just the markets and the government and everyone seems to have accepted a certain level of debt that we're just going to exist at, and then a certain level of spending and taxes. Now, she put up spending, although there were spending cuts in crucial areas. She put up taxes, particularly on business, which particularly has harmed the economy. £25 billion taken out of businesses seems to be a mad thing to be doing if you think that growing the economy is the foundation of what you're trying to do. But she also saw this reaction in the markets where the cost of our government borrowing has gone up. Why specifically will the cost of a 10-year gilt, a 30-year gilt, have gone up in the markets since that budget? What is it the markets are seeing and judging that's made them say, we think that the interest payment on government debt from Britain should be, and this is an astonishing fact, higher than it is for the economic basket case that is Greece?
Well, I've got a slither of sympathy for Rachel Reeves because it is worth saying that yields have risen quite sharply in many other countries as well. There is sort of a global trend here, which is that people are now more worried about inflation and interest rates again. And that's partly actually down to looking at the US, where there's an expectation that Trump will boost growth, but also inflation, and the US central bank may not be as quick to cut interest rates. So it's partly global, not entirely Rachel Reeves' fault. But there's no doubt that interest rates have risen further in the UK than they have in other countries. And I think that's because investors are concerned about a number of things. One is that all this increased spending is going to be inflationary, so the Bank of England won't cut interest rates as quickly as it would otherwise have done. People think this budget will be bad for growth, and so the tax increases won't raise as much money as the government has been hoping for. And finally, even if it all works, then there's going to have to be a lot more borrowing. And if investors are being expected to buy more bonds, then they're going to have to be offered higher interest rates on those bonds, and that money has to come from somewhere. It may not mean that taxes go up now, but higher debt interest payments will ultimately have to be paid by somebody in future. And that means future taxpayers will be picking up the bill for this as well.
And that's the thing, there isn't, as our caller Vernon pointed out, there isn't a magic money tree. It's going to have to be paid for by people paying more taxes now, or it's going to have to be paid for by people paying more taxes in the future. I mean, that's how these things are serviced. The Speaker, Sir Lindsay Hoyle, a few minutes ago granted an urgent question at the House of Commons to Shadow Chancellor Mel Stride. He tabled a question to the Chancellor asking for a statement on the growing pressure of borrowing costs on public finances. Amid all this talk, sources in the Treasury saying there are contingency plans that are being drawn up in the Treasury for a statement in the March sort of mini statement that they're ahead of spending review for different departments in the government, that there should be, possibly spending cuts, tax rises, suggesting very much it would be about spending cuts. But again, 10 billion quid's worth is a huge sum if that were necessary. The Chancellor decided not to turn up herself, obviously busy, I don't know, playing chess or I don't know, answering things in the complaints department at HBOS, I don't know. But the Treasury Minister, Darren Jones, is currently taking questions from MPs. Interesting that she's not turned up herself when she would have expected this question. But, I mean, Can the government, you say you've got some sympathy, can the government defend themselves, or actually have they just done exactly similar stuff to what Liz Truss did, and yet for some reason what Liz Truss did led the news 24/7 for days and weeks on end, BBC and elsewhere, barely got a mention for 5 minutes on the Radio 4 Today programme, their flagship news programme this morning. I don't think it was mentioned at all yesterday, after 15 minutes on some celebrities losing their homes in California wildfires.
Well, I think that the mistake that Liz Truss made was to cut taxes more than expected before announcing corresponding spending reductions and also implementing all the sort of supply side structural reforms that we need to boost growth in the longer term. But arguably Rachel Reeves' mistake is even bigger because she's actually raised taxes before doing any of those other things. And as I say, that's had a chilling effect on business confidence and also consumer confidence. So I think if it's a straight comparison, then what Rachel Reeves has done is far worse. In terms of what happens next, I don't think we're completely doomed. I mean, it is possible that growth will pick up more than expected over the next few years.
Everything's possible.
Yeah, it's possible, but remember, there's a lot
likely?
A lot depends here on what the Office for Budget Responsibility says is going to happen in 5 years' time. So you can actually get quite a lot of turmoil in the next year or so. And it doesn't necessarily mean that the government has to raise taxes or cut spending further now. There are also a few things that the government could do that wouldn't be too painful. So, for example, that they could reduce the amount of interest that the Bank of England pays to commercial banks on all the extra reserves created under quantitative easing. And, that is something that could actually save 10 to 20 billion in the short term if they were willing to do that.
Isn't that something that the Reform Party talked about?
Yes, I mean, the Reform Party actually went a lot further and we're suggesting abolishing the payment of interest on reserves altogether, which I think will be a step too far. But it is interesting that this is another idea where reform appears to be ahead of the curve. I think the big worry though at the moment is that not only, of course, we haven't actually seen the full impact of most of the budget measures yet. They don't come into force in April when national insurance goes up and the national minimum wage jumps as well. So there's that what's still to come. But in addition, we've got the spending review. And my big worry is that on the one hand, the government is throwing loads of money at certain areas where productivity is very low, like the NHS and education, which arguably are things that could be largely left to the market. But at the same time, it's planning to cut spending or not raise it by as much as it should in things like criminal justice and possibly defence, which are things that can't be left to the market, where the state has to do things properly. Absolutely. So we're potentially in the worst of both worlds there.
Well, on that happy note, it's been very cheering chatting to you on this beautiful January sunny day in the freezing cold. Julian Jessup, appreciate you joining us, independent economist there. I mean... Let's be honest. There's no doubt at all, Philip Ingram. Things are bad. But again, apparently, it does turn out we've got to spare $9 billion for the Chagos Islands. Well, this absurd deal not yet done that David Lammy and Keir Starmer are desperate to push through before Donald Trump can come in and scupper it. We've got the Diego Garcia UK and US military base on the Chagos Islands. Mauritius never owned them. For some reason, someone decided, and it was a little bit of self-flagellating on the British colonies, that we would give, quote, back these Chagos Islands to Mauritius. Mauritius never owned them, got no claim on them. They're thousands of miles from Mauritius. But not only are we giving them to Mauritius out of the goodness of our heart,
we're paying for
we're going to pay them 90 million quid a year to then lease back for 100 years the rights to Diego Garcia, the military base. But we're going to upfront some of that payment of the $9 billion. Because apparently we've got so much spare cash, we can't afford to help pensioners heat their homes here. Or spend money on the criminal justice system or more police, all this. But we have got money to give Mauritius to give them. I mean, what on earth is going on?
Well, maybe we're going to put a big solar farm in there and give them more of the 11.3 billion that they've got on green projects and other bits and pieces. I don't know. There's no logic to Mauritius whatsoever, and therefore there has to be something underlying that we're not getting underlying the whole drive behind this and everything else. And I'm doing some digging around at the minute, and some of the things that are coming out are really quite.
The only people who benefit from this are China. Someone is in the payment of someone is in payment of China who's pushing this. I'm sorry, there's no other explanation. There is no diplomatic, economic, defence reason for us to do this.
And I've just read, and I haven't confirmed this, so I'm putting something out there that may not be accurate. Is the legal representative for Mauritius is an individual that helped set up matrix chambers in the barristers' chambers in the UK, which was the chambers that employed Keir Starmer.
Yes, and is, I believe, a lot of the other people involved in this employed by. Who knows? Who knows? Not casting aspersions.
No.
I don't want to cease his letter. No, thank you.
Not at all.
10:48 is the time. We're going to take a break. Then we're going to be talking to Tony Smith, former head of the UK Border Force, about whether or not David Lammy's latest wheeze to tackle the smuggling gangs is going to work. I think I already know the answer, but we'll give it a go anyway. This is Talk, the Home of Common Sense.
If you aren't ready, that's your choice, my friend. I just wondered whether there was a response from you to that.
I wasn't aware of that, and I'm sad to see how it go. He and I have worked very closely over the, first of all, the London mayoral campaign and then the general election campaign. But he's taken a different stance on, I think, this Robinson issue, and so in a sense we just agree to disagree, and it's as simple as that.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk, the Home of Common Sense. It's coming up to 10:52. I'm Julia Hartley-Brewer. Philip Ingram's still with me. Get his thoughts on what our next guest has to say. And this is about David Lammy, the Foreign Secretary, who's made his latest announcement about how to smash the smuggling gangs. Yep, good luck with that. A world-first policy. Yes, when it's a world-first policy, maybe there's a reason why other countries haven't tried it, David Lammy. Just throwing that idea out there. But the idea is financial sanctions being used not just against, of course, terrorists, but also and organised criminals being being used against channel boat kingpins in a bid to cripple networks. Basically, tough new financial sanctions, treating the human traffickers like terrorists, cyber criminals and corrupt kleptocrats, allowing ministers to freeze the bank accounts, freeze property rights and other assets of people they suspect of trafficking. Also, traffickers being publicly named for the first time. Oh, they'll be so upset about that as well. Well, let's talk to Tony Smith about it. He's former head of the UK Border Force. Tony Smith, is there a reason this hasn't been done before?
Good morning, Julia. It has been done before. It's dressed up in a different way. So I suppose you could say that, well, we haven't seen any country say we're going to use sanctions in particular against individuals. But I do, as you know, a lot of international travel. I chaired a conference in Manila in the Philippines just in October, Julia. I mean, reports are all online. We've got reports from the United Nations, from Canada, from America, from Australia, who are all doing this sort of stuff, is trying to upstream disruption. But if you read those reports, you're really interested in this, it's almost impossible to disrupt gangs in source and transit countries, because a lot of this is endemic within the infrastructure of those countries, I'm afraid. On the Pacific Rim and in Africa, there are state and non-state actors that are involved in this business to one extent or another. We know that from our intelligence through the Border 5, so it is an international problem. They're right to say, we do need to do more overseas. But in my experience, sanctions only really work, Julia, when you can, when you're within your own jurisdiction, within the UK. So there are some in the UK that are involved in this business. I think they have been stepping up their efforts to try and find those. But when we're talking about activities in places like the Pacific Rim, in Africa, in source and transit countries, through the EU into the UK, these are hugely lucrative crime gangs that I think it's a very bold step for the government to say, well, look, we're going
to tackle this. Well, especially, and as you say, they're often working with local officials anywhere. The corruption levels are endemic in many of these countries. But this is the thing as well. Also, it's this idea, here's John Smith. He's involved in smuggling gangs. I mean, we haven't been able to track him down because he's clever enough not to be the person putting the people on the boats or blowing the boats up himself or pushing them off the beaches in Calais. He doesn't even answer the phone to anyone who does any of this. He's 10 phone calls away from this. The people working for him probably don't even know his name. But what he has been dumb enough to do is to put all of his assets in his personal name. And he's done all his money transfers. He says to people, when you pay to get on my boat, or when you pay the people who get on your boat and then those people pay me, can you do it in a BACS transfer so it's all traceable, so people can find it in my bank account? These people deal in suitcases full of cash. They deal with Swiss bank accounts and stuff. They're not traceable. These people aren't idiots. They're making a couple of million quid a week out of this. They're not fools.
Yeah, we've spoken about this before, Julia, and I think we need to realise that the criminal justice system in the UK is not capable of disrupting international organised crime gangs. And if you speak to anybody from the National Crime Agency, people who worked in this business, they will tell you that the best you can hope to do is disrupt these international gangs, and disrupting these gangs. I mean, I'm glad the Foreign Office are finally stepping up, because in my experience, Foreign Office haven't really shown much interest in this. And everyone says it's all down to the Border Force and it's down to the Home Office. Well, it's not actually. It is an international problem, but it has to be disruption and it has to be an international effort. They need to get closer to the UN. They need to get closer to the Border 5, and they need to show a physical presence that are actually doing something. I'm seeing a lot of rhetoric coming out from the government. It's the right rhetoric, Julie. It is right. That,
happy for people to say the right things. I'm happy for them to try. I'd just like some of it to work eventually. But, I'm old-fashioned on delivery. I don't know.
The proof of the pudding is in those numbers that you report on every week, Julia. Those boats that you're showing pictures of them now coming up onto the beaches in the UK. The proof of the pudding on whatever they're doing, whether it's upstream or with France or here, will be in those numbers. And as well as I do, those numbers are up. They're continuing to come across. There is no real deterrent for some of those nationality cohorts. The hotels are still being used. The backlogs are still there.
Well, now they've got the promise, they'll probably be rushed through and they'll be given the nod and allowed to stay, and then they can live here to their heart's content. I mean, when those numbers have gone up, and we've got all those reports about them going up, Tony, is that down to a failure of policy? Like, the Tories are saying that's because you abandoned the Rwanda policy, which was never actually put in place. I don't think it was much of a deterrent personally anyway. But is it the fault of what the Labour government has done or hasn't done, or is it down to, things like the weather or the conditions on the channel? What do you think it's down to?
It is down to the weather, mainly. We have red days, green days. You know, the Border Force monitors the weather, Julia. That we do our resource deployments around the weather.
They're probably more accurate than the weather forecast we look at, aren't they?
But we can't control that. I mean, I think that, to be fair to them, they have gone on a case clearance mission. They have got removals up on some of the easier to remove nationalities because they've ditched the Rwanda plan. I don't agree with you on what you're saying about Rwanda. I thought it was a really bold attempt, actually, by the last...
If it was on a grand scale, if it was literally you arrive on a boat, you're off to Rwanda, that would have worked. That's basically what Australia did. They were going to ship 300 people there. It wasn't going to be a deterrent.
We were going to do that, Julia, but we couldn't because of the legal frameworks under which we...
No, but even if they shipped 300 people, that's not a deterrent.
Well, it depends. I mean, there was some evidence of displacement to Ireland. There was some evidence from intelligence out of Calais that people were thinking twice about getting in one of those boats if they were, as you say, going to go to Manston, straight to an airfield and straight to Rwanda. I think that would have been it. But, of course, we'll never know now, will we? Because it didn't happen. But I haven't seen anything that this government has put in place that's going to deal with the problem of people coming from countries where we can't remove people. What are you going to do with them? If you can't send them back to France, you're going to have to let them stay. That will still be the pull factor and the numbers will still come. And we haven't been able to smash that either with the Conservative government or with the Labour government.
I'm kind of at the point where, you know, we pick them up once they hit our half of the channel and then with our boats just take them straight back to those beaches at Calais. We just put them in boats back, literally off you go. You're just not ever going to come to our shores, end of. Always good to talk to you, Tony Smith. Great to get your expertise always on these things. Former head of the UK Border Force. Certainly, Philip Ingram, more expertise than we're going to get from David Lammy.
Oh, very much so. And David Lammy is bringing out soundbite politics, which is not based on reality. You know, he's just trying to deflect from what's going on elsewhere.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's not the first time it's been tried. They tried it elsewhere. Yeah. And it doesn't really work.
Well, exactly. And there's laws in place at the minute to take money off people. Unexplained wealth orders, Proceeds of Crime Act and the rest of it. But yeah, it's there. It's dressing it up in a different way to try and deflect from what's hurting the government elsewhere at the moment with the economy and with the rape gang issues.
Oh, well, deep sighs, everybody. Lots more to come. Do look at your calls coming in, 0344 499 1000, all the stories we're talking about. This is Talk, Home of Common Sense.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
A very, very good morning to you. Welcome back to the show. This is Talk, the home of common sense, with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer, coming up 3 minutes past 11 o'clock. Lots more to talk about today, and whether you are listening on DAB Plus radio or on your smart speaker, watching on YouTube or on your connected device, it is great to have your company. Great also to have the company of Philip Ingram, former senior military intelligence officer. Once again, good morning to you.
Good morning again.
Carry on talking about, and lots of calls coming in on this, on Chancellor Rachel Reeves drawing up contingency plans for emergency spending cuts, all tax rises in March. Ooh, which will she choose? How will we know? This is government borrowing costs have soared higher than after Liz Truss's mini-budget in 2022, when everyone lost their frigging minds about the cost of borrowing. Apparently, nothing to see here. Barely a mention. BBC mentioned it. I cannot go over this. 15 minutes on the California wildfires. 15 minutes before they got to the small matter of our economy going down the drain. Extraordinary also, Liz Truss today, her lawyers sent a cease and desist letter to Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister, no less, to say, stop saying these untrue and defamatory lies about me crashing the economy. I didn't crash the economy. Fascinated to hear your thoughts on this. Do get in touch. Your reaction, please, on 0344 499 1000. You can text on 87222. You can get in touch on X at talkTV as well. Calls are charged at the national rate. Texts cost one standard network rate message. Of course, tweets are free. Also going to talk more about the Labour MPs last night voting down the Tory call for a new national inquiry into grooming gangs, and the government, just this extraordinary, this Chagos story, offering to pay Mauritius a total of £90 million a year, a whopping £9 billion in total, as part of this, people say controversial, I just say absurd and inexplicable deal to cede sovereignty of the Chagos Islands to Mauritius, despite the fact that Mauritius has no claim of ownership whatsoever over those islands in the middle of the Pacific. Also, a call from Donald Trump's incoming terror chief. You'll have heard him on this show many times, Seb Gorka. He says that the UK should take back British members of Islamic State who are stuck in Syrian prison camps, do our bit, basically, get these people kind of off the world streets, including Shamima Begum. Of course, the problem there is, of course, we wouldn't get them off the streets. They'd just be on British streets. I'd love to hear your thoughts on all of those stories. As I say, 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. Philip Ingram, let's start with the economy. An emergency question was granted in the House of Commons by the Speaker, and obviously there was some chess tournament or some complaints that needed to be answered in HBOS, so Rachel from Accounts wasn't available to answer those. So the Chancellor didn't turn up. No surprise there. No, but the Treasury Minister, Darren Jones, did. He said, financial markets are always evolving. As the Shadow Chancellor knows, he said to Mel Stride. So it is a long-standing convention that the government does not comment on specific financial market movements, so I will not be breaking that convention today. And apparently those gilt yields, which are going up to above the cost of 2022 borrowing, and indeed way back to the world, the financial crisis, 2008-9, are determined by a wide range of international and domestic factors, and it's normal for the prices to vary when there are wider movements in global financial markets. Well, it's funny because, it was all blamed on Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng in September 2022.
They were happy to comment
Apparently
then.
It's just stuff that's happening overseas. But we know one of the reasons, and there's no doubt at all, yields have risen in other countries, as independent economist Julian Jessup told us in the last hour. However, one of the reasons why there's a lack of confidence in Britain and why our borrowing costs are currently higher than Greece's.
Yep.
Greece is an economic basket case, right? We're one of the biggest economies in the world by GDP. Sorry, how on earth are our costs of borrowing higher than Greece's? If it wasn't the fact that there is a lack of confidence in the markets, in the ability of this government to run the economy and grow the economy.
Yeah. And that confidence or lack of confidence goes down to the fact that the measures that are brought in the budget are business disabling rather than business enabling, and the relationship that the UK government is setting up with the incoming Trump administration is not good, and that's putting it mildly, and that is going to have a massive influence on the global economy. So UK borrowing costs are likely to go up even more.
Oh, hooray.
Wonderful stuff.
I was feeling quite chirpy today because the weather's nice again. I mean, I know it's freezing cold and you know, a lot of people are struggling with paying their heating bills today as a result of economic decisions by this government. But at least it's beautiful blue skies, which is a bit more cheery than when it's miserable out and grey out there. But I mean, we've got food prices are not going anywhere but up. The British Retail Consortium has said at least 4% later this year. That's a huge hike, and coming on top of all the other hikes. And anyway, a lot of the food that you buy now, you just know, I mean, a lot of it's just got smaller. You know, you buy your Quality Street at Christmas, or you buy, you know, pretty much every product you buy now is just
smaller. Yes,
it stays the same price. It's smaller. I mean, that does actually hit people's purses. I mean, people are not going to get better off. Energy prices, your water bills, your council tax bill, or your taxes. I mean, pretty much all of the outgoing costs have gone up for people. Their wages are not going up. When people say, oh, people have had a wage rise of X or Y, well, you know, does that cover for all of the inflationary costs of the last few years? I very much doubt it.
Well, only if you're part of the RMT or something else and have blackmailed the government, which every union is now going to do, because they're going to go, well, you know, the cost of living is going up and therefore we need even more money and all the rest of it. And that's going to make Rachel from accounts have to deal with even more issues as the country goes on further strikes. We're in for a very, very disruptive 2025, I think. I
was of the view before the last election that, you know, I thought the Tory government needed to be out because I thought they had failed. And you can't just be not as bad as the other people and staying government. End of, as far as I'm concerned. We had a caller earlier saying that, you know, he blames anyone who voted Labour because, you know, this is what happens. Labour doing exactly what they always do, he says. Now, the reality is, last time, you know, when Blair got in, he came in, there was a great economy going. When they left an absolute tragic economy. We saw you know, it was a lot of the deregulation of banking that led to the banking crisis. One of the reasons it hit us so hard, because we're so reliant on banking economy as part of our, you know, paying our bills here. But I thought there was an element where, look, people are going to have a little dose of Labour. Wake up call to the Tories, you know, like Reform and other parties who are speaking sense to either influence stories or have a chance themselves, have one bit of new life into our political establishment. But I was kind of the view that, OK, even if Labour were bad, maybe voters need to have a little dose of this because they've done off bleating virtue signal and say all the right things, but actually when it comes to the difficult choices in government, oh, what a surprise. Like we're getting these hints from the Treasury, well, they're more likely to be spending cuts than tax rises. Well, yeah, that's what, there were spending cuts in the austerity years under Osborne. Yeah, difficult choices have to be made when there's no money left. That's kind of the deal. And saying more money this, more money for this, oh, more money for the WASPy women, more money for the you know, the post office, more of, and then at some point you have to pay for it. But they're choices they make. Giving the train drivers a load more money, paying you know, billions to the Mauritians to take Chagos off us, even though there's no reason to give the Chagos Islands away to them. Billions on a load of mad wind power stuff. Billions on climate nonsense abroad. They splash the cash on nonsense schemes all the time, but they don't spend it on the stuff that really matters. And they take money from businesses trying to employ one or two extra people. And every small business that employs one or two extra people, that is the difference between a growing, booming economy and an economy in the doldrums.
No plans whatsoever beforehand. I talked to someone who's a Labour frontbencher now before the election, and he said that we're not doing any planning because we don't need to win the election. The Tories are going to lose it.
Yeah, but they didn't tell us what they were going to do. Well, I thought, OK, you're not going to tell us because you're not going to do bad. I didn't realise their decisions would be this bad, or that there were so few plans in place.
But all they've done is they've done things that they think are populist left-wing issues. So the 11.3 billion to overseas green. Hey, we have to look after all these poor countries that can't afford the green. So we're going to give them 11.3 billion.
They can't afford green because what they need is cheap fossil fuels.
Yeah, exactly. Looking after the unions. Oh, so we've solved all the strikes by looking after the unions. Well, that's going to come back and bite them this year. And hitting private schools because if you're a socialist, private schools are bad, and then hitting profit in business because profit is just lining the fat cats and the multi-billionaires can afford
profit
this.
Is what pays for everything.
Everything.
You can only tax the profits.
It's clear they don't understand how business works and how the economy works.
They don't understand anything.
No, they don't.
I mean, are they genuinely useless and thick?
Yes.
That's scary.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of the civil servants who are dealing with a lot of this stuff are equally the same. I think a lot of these people, they're walking around their Oxbridge degrees. I just don't think they understand how the world works. I'm not sure I trust these people to go down to the local shop and buy a loaf of bread and come back.
Yeah, but a lot of them have never worked in business, and this is the trouble.
I've never sat. I mean, I live with a man who runs the business. Okay, runs the business. And when he talks to me about, like, you know, I need to hire somebody else. Here's the cost of. Here's what I can afford to pay them.
Yes.
And here's the extra, you know, £8,000 it costs me to hire them, because this is the extra cost of an extra desk, of you know, extra national insurance, the tax, the cost of recruitment agency. I mean, you actually go through it, you think, wow, okay, so how much extra business do you have to get for that after tax?
Exactly.
But makes that person worthwhile. And these are the sort of numbers. Now, I think we're all amazed when people run on, you know, as a candidate on The Apprentice with Lord Sugar, and they're doing some little task, and it doesn't occur to them to sell the sandwich they make, you know, to sell at a marketplace for more than it costs them to buy the ingredients, because these people are idiots. I'd like to think that the people in government would be able to do that stuff. I don't think any of these people could get on The Apprentice either.
No, they couldn't do. Yeah, they have no business ideas. You know, I ran a business which I then left because the financial director wouldn't let me fix it. The fixing bit was an individual who was running the commercial side of things and didn't know how much it cost for us to deliver the services that we were delivering.
Again, not in any way then running a business.
Yeah, well, exactly. And when I pointed out to him that it cost us more to deliver than he was selling it for, he didn't understand the logic.
There's a reason why businesses fail, isn't there?
Exactly. He could be in the cabinet now.
Yeah, or win The Apprentice.
Exactly.
Either way. I tell you, I'm just surprised Rachel Reeves, among the child prodigy and chess-winning champion, and the claims about being an economist at HBOS and everything. I'm just surprised she didn't add in won The Apprentice. I mean, she's not that big on facts.
Well, the rest of her CV is so accurate, isn't it?
Talking of facts and truth, Liz Truss's lawyers have sent a cease and desist letter to the Prime Minister. This is an extraordinary thing.
Has it ever happened before?
That's the thing. Well, genuinely, I was talking to Harry Cole, the political editor of The Sun, just before we came on air, and it was like, you know, he said, I saw this and I thought, this must be a spoof.
Yeah.
I mean, it must be. This is something like Led by Donkeys have done or something, because they're obsessed with Liz Truss. they don't seem to have any issue with anything this government is doing, but they're absolutely obsessed with the Prime Minister from now 3 years ago. But she's basically got her lawyers to write a cease and desist letter telling the Prime Minister, stop claiming that I crashed the economy. It's not true, and it's defamatory, and may indeed have led to her losing her seat as an MP as well. Given where we are right now in the economy and the cost of borrowing, and given the claims about Liz Truss's budget at the time, I thought a lot of it, frankly, was actually, you know, it was bad politicking by her. It's very arrogant.
Yes.
She didn't know how to pull together, you know, people who voted for rival candidates, things. There was a political failure. But economically wise, the vast majority of the borrowing that she was going to raise to fund her budget was about funding the cost of basically subsidising people's energy bills, domestic energy bills. Well, that was something that the Labour Party had also called for. All the Tory candidates said they'd do, and was going to be done by whoever was Prime Minister. It was untenable. People couldn't afford to pay £5,000 on their energy bills. It wasn't going to be affordable for people. So that was going to happen, and everyone said it was absolutely off the scale, and it was unpredictable. It was only a few billion quid extra that wasn't accounted for. That didn't make sense about why the markets reacted the way they did.
Well, exactly, and therefore she failed in two ways. One, bringing the Tory party together, so leadership, and the second bit was in the messaging that went out to give confidence to the markets. However, you know, I think Keir Starmer and Rachel from Accounts is making Liz Truss's leadership and government look competent.
Yeah, I mean, that is a terrifying thing, isn't it? Talking of competence, what did you make of the Labour decision yesterday to whip their MPs to vote against the demand from the Tories for a national inquiry into grooming gangs? It was an amendment that came onto another bill. Big question marks about a lot of the changes to education under this children's education and welfare bill. But in terms of some of the issues like preventing people from having schooling their children at home when they're not deemed suitable. So Sarah Sharif's parents and the like wouldn't have been able to, under this law, to school her at home for 4 months, and perhaps her life might have been saved. But it would have meant this bill fell. But, I mean, these are parliamentary technicalities, aren't they? But, I mean, the demand for a national inquiry is growing. Do you think that Labour were right to do that, or do you think that actually they're going to end up having a national inquiry anyway?
I think they're going to end up having a national inquiry anyway. You know, Labour were always going to whip this. You know, the education bill itself is fundamentally flawed because it stops local areas adjusting the education to meet local needs. and
they want everything to be controlled
everything has to be the same across the board.
Every teacher being paid the same. Yeah. It's like, well,
And again, we've got the Prime Minister, who's the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, standing up and lauding this and everything else, and it only applies in England, so it doesn't apply through Scotland, Northern Ireland,
that's because
Wales.
Those are devolved powers.
But therefore it should be led by the government minister who's responsible for it, not the Prime Minister, who's the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. But he didn't even vote in it.
But you pointed this out earlier.
Yeah.
Was it the Prime Minister, the Deputy Prime Minister,
Deputy Prime Minister, and the Chancellor
didn't turn up for this vote?
Didn't turn up for the vote. And the vote was all about the Tory amendment for child abuse. So those three were pushing for an inquiry when it came to Partygate and cake and Boris in Downing Street. Yeah. But white little girls being raped by Muslim men is something that they don't want to vote for.
But this is the thing. I mean, I think there are arguments against an inquiry in terms of how long these people are doing. Yeah. But I think Kemi Badenoch made the key argument yesterday when she talked about how, we need to join the dots. We don't know how many thousands, tens and tens and tens of thousands of girls have been raped, how many now, what the modus operandi, why it's happening. We need to have an investigation into why people didn't investigate, why whistleblowers were shut down, why local councillors, why local police, why local social workers and care home workers didn't do anything about it. We need to tackle that because it's ongoing right now, and that doesn't mean that while you're doing that you can't be fast tracking some of the justice. If you can fast track somebody who threw some stones outside an asylum hotel or at police after the Southport attacks, or somebody wrote a hurty tweet or a hurty Facebook post, I don't see why you can't fast track some of these trusts. Now, they're much more complicated trusts. Gathering the evidence takes a long time, but people waiting 4, 5, 6 years to see their attackers, their rapists put behind bars is unacceptable.
Yeah. But there's nothing to stop the recommendations of the current inquiry that are published out there, the Alexis J inquiry, being implemented, and then at the same time recognising that actually you need to pull all the threads together, work out what actually went wrong and who did not carry out their roles and responsibilities as per what the requirement was under the job, and hold them to account. Because if you don't hold people to account, then this is going to continue. And I see constant reports across social media where people are saying this is still going on.
Yeah, I mean, that's the really big worry. Just finally, I do want to ask you about the thousands of civil servants who apparently are going to go on strike indefinitely over their demand for them to come back and work in the office. Not even, by the way, 5 days a week, for less than 5 days a week. I mean, I'm not sure whether we're going to notice, I'm not going to lie, whether a lot of these people are in the office or not.
I don't think we are. And actually it solves Rachel from account's problem because she needs to save money and do cuts from somewhere. So
well, no, they'll still be paid.
But I think there might be a way of finding their jobs being re-ruled or cut completely.
Well, 4,000 staff at Land Registry responsible for registering the ownership of property in England and Wales. They're refusing to cover for colleagues or take any extra work which they consider to be beyond their job description from January the 21st. And they're going to go on strike indefinitely and say they're simply not willing to return to work in the office for 3 days a week. I mean, again, I think you actually should do what Elon Musk did and other big companies have done and just say, back in the office on Monday, or I will consider that you've tendered your resignation. Your contract, I don't know about even when I was freelance, your contract states that your employer is allowed to make reasonable requests about where your workplace. They can't say, oh, by the way, you're going to be paid the same and you got the same job, but you're now in Leeds when you live in London. That's not reasonable. But saying yes, you have to come to the office that you worked in for years until 2020, it's not an unreasonable demand. And if you don't want to turn up, that's fine. But I'm not entirely sure we're going to notice when you lot are on the dole.
Yeah, well, allegedly we've got tens of thousands of people who've come across on little boats who are PhD qualified and Masters qualified. Get them to do it. Change the law to allow them to be in the civil service, bring them in and they can contribute to society.
Problem solved. This is why we have Philip Ingram in. I mean, exactly. I mean, again, they are going to be too busy doing brain surgery, though. Building bridges with their great engineering skills. It's amazing, isn't it? It's amazing. It's amazing how many of them are so qualified.
And
such a young age.
Exactly.
I know. Who knew?
I know. Undated passports, or
there'll be complaints. Send them to Philip, not me. Just for once. Philip Ingram, thank you very much indeed. Coming up, we're going to get to your calls. Some great calls coming in on the economy. What a surprise! If only there were some great calls in the economy from Rachel from Accounts. That's up next. This is Talk, the home of common sense.
about a public inquiry is that you're asking a bit more than who. You're asking why, what were the root causes of the corrupt? Was it a fear of being accused of racism? Was it something else? Was it incompetence? What was it? And I think, as I say, on balance, I mean, I'm not waving flags on this one, but on balance, I think an inquiry might finally clear up those answers.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is indeed Talk, the home of common sense with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. It's coming up to 11:25. Philip Ingram's still with me. And indeed, lots of you are on the phone lines. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call about any of the topics we're talking about. But specifically, Rachel from Accounts, Chancellor Rachel Reeves, may have to make emergency spending cuts or raise more taxes. I don't know what other taxes you could possibly raise that our economy could cope with, as the government borrowing costs have soared higher than after Liz Truss's 2022 mini-budget. And yet, weirdly, everyone isn't making a big fuss about that. Not the BBC, barely gets a mention. Forest fires affecting celebrities' homes, massive big issue. A small matter of basically the fiscal headroom for the Chancellor of 10 billion quid being eaten up by those extra debt costs, i.e. that's your and my taxes right now, going on that rather than going on, I don't know, tackling long waits in A&E or tackling children's education or long delays in criminal justice or putting more police on the streets or any of the other things that need to be done in this country. No, we're just going to pay it to the banks to borrow their money to service everything else to make sure we can, pay train drivers 70 grand a year to do their job 4 days a week. I mean, sorry, we are in mad territory right here, not just economically, not just in terms of the government, but also, by the way, the mainstream media and their extraordinary choice of topics this week about so many big issues to talk about. And if they really, really do think that celebrities losing their mansions in forest fires in California is the number one, in fact, almost, I would say, only story in town this week, they are living in cloud cuckoo land. Let's go to the phone lines. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. David has called that number. He's in Essex. Hello, David.
Yeah, hello, Julia.
Hello.
I'm just running around my jobs today, and unfortunately, I've only got one on the go at the moment.
What do you do?
I'm a builder, so I mainly do extensions. I do the odd new build.
Oh, I'm taking your number after the...
Right, but since that budget, I've had... The reality is, on the ground out here, is I've had two jobs that they're worth around about £400,000.
Yeah.
And they've both been stopped. They've been stopped because clients are worried about losing their jobs, or it's the interest rate of borrowing money, because we can't all suddenly go and find 200 grand to build a...
But you borrow money, you improve the value of your home, and therefore it's an investment, and perhaps cheaper than moving a house with stamp duty, so you've got an extension, you can have another kid, and I know loads of people who've done this, but you're saying people are going, yeah, now's not the time, we haven't got the money, we can't be sure we're going to have the money in the future.
Exactly, and I've got skilled workers sitting at home right now with no work to go and do, thanks to this budget by Rachel Reeves. That's the reality of it.
Yeah.
I've got a young lad that I've trained up for 3 years. I've trained this boy up, and he's become a really high skilled worker.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, he had a bad start in life. He had a little baby that he's had to bring up.
Yeah.
I've got him into leaving his parents into a council house, because that's all he could afford at the time. I've paid him good money. I've trained him up for 3 years.
Brilliant. Good for you.
Now he's really skilled. He's a multi-skilled person. I've had to let him go at Christmas.
And this is the thing. You're one of those evil business owners who don't care about your workers. Rubbish. Like so many, particularly small business owners. you bring people through, you try and look after people, you try and care for people, and trying to build a future for them like you've got for yourself, and then you've got no choice at some time. You can't keep someone on you can't actually pay.
I couldn't have any work for him, Julia. He stopped. I said, look, I can't. I gave him 3 weeks' notice that he had to find something else.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, that hasn't. He's on the phone to me. I'm desperately trying to get him back. But I have to run a careful ship. I can't have people paying people money if I haven't got any work to give
and
them.
Presumably everyone else is in exactly the same boat. What's the answer? What's the solution?
I think there was a petition going around a little while ago that had about 3 million people asking for another election. I think that may have to be the only way out of it.
Well, if there were another election, realistically, if the votes are panning out as they are at the moment, Labour would still be in power, just not with the same majority.
Well, as you say, the Tories, let's face it, they buggered it up. It was a complete disaster.
It's a technical term.
I'm sorry about that.
No, it's a technical term. I'm with you all the way.
Yeah, and as you said earlier in your programme, maybe we should have given this lot a go, but they just don't know how to run an economy.
Yeah, but I only thought this lot, particularly under Keir Starmer, Rachel Reeves, should be given a go so that people had a dose of reality, that they talk a good game, they don't really know what they're doing, and when they do carry out their policies, oh, look what happens. The cost of borrowing goes up because there's no confidence in the economy, because they literally put a tax on jobs, like your jobs.
Exactly. But, I get called far right for listening to your programme. There's nowhere to go. There's nowhere to go. I don't need to be running a business, but I love my job. I love doing it. I love producing quality extensions for people. Yeah. But at the moment, I've got half my workforce are sitting at home because they've got nothing to go and do.
David, that is absolutely heartbreaking. I really appreciate your call. I mean, I think you've just, frankly, absolutely nailed it. And particularly also, thank you for that call, Philip. I know my husband has gone through this with his business as well. There's people, you bring someone on, who's often had a hard start in life, and in a dead-end job, and just, train them up. And, because sort of guest of honour at our wedding. In fact, my husband left school at 16, worked in a paper factory, and then he had a guy who basically said, "You're a bright lad. You should go. You should go to uni. Go and do So he did evening classes and went back to uni, did computer science. Then now he runs an IT business. He's been really successful. And you need to have someone often in that situation to say, hey, maybe you can do more. Maybe you do. So that's something my husband has tried to. I love him, honestly. Yeah. I know I say terrible things on there, but honestly, one of the reasons I love him is he's such a good man. He wants to sort of, pay that forward, and does that for some of the young lads that he takes on. And you can feel how heartbreaking it is for David to try to help this man. Not just give him a job, try and help him get a council house, try and help him feed his family, to try and do the right thing and to help young people get on. But you can't help someone get on if you've got no work to pay them for.
Well, exactly, and that work, as David quite rightly highlighted, isn't coming because those that wanted the extensions that would have been getting the potential bonuses or their promotion and work or others that aren't getting it because the economy says so, because the profit's not coming in. And this is he's a perfect example of the second and third order implications of the decisions that the government just doesn't understand.
And this will be happening in thousands of businesses. I'm wondering if you're a train driver who's now on 70k as your basic for 4-day week, can you afford an extension in Essex? And we'll give you David's number so he can employ that lad again, so he can feed his kid rather than go on the dole.
Exactly.
Oh, there you go. There you go.
There we go. Yes.
There's a solution. Train drivers, you're going to have to keep the economy going now. It's just you guys. Right, let's go to the phone lines again. 0344 499 1000. Simon is in Basingstoke. Hello, Simon.
Hello, Julia. I'm afraid it's very sad to hear about that individual, but I think this is something a lot more people are going to experience over the next few years. In the US, they've cut interest rates quite a lot, but their cost of government borrowing has actually gone up by 1% as well. Yeah. The trouble is we're facing a global recession that's already happening. But also that governments have got huge levels of debt. The UK is going to spend £106 billion just on repaying the interest on the debt we have. Yeah. So it's going to be the fourth most expensive line item in the budget.
More than we spend on education and defence. I mean, it's just extraordinary.
It is, and to be honest, the government talked about introducing growth. Can anyone name me a single thing that they mentioned in the budget or they have in their policies that will encourage growth? We've got the net zero insanity. We've got an increase in the number of civil servants and the amount of regulation that we have, and we're importing more low-skilled workers who will cost more in public services than they contribute in taxes.
It's so depressing. I mean, that's the thing. It's just so depressing. And we can all see it. Look at the budget. It's like they can't be serious, and yet they are. But what do you make of the fact that, so many, the people, the great and the good and the media seem to have a much bigger issue with Liz Truss's budget in 22 than they do with this one?
Well, I think the Liz Truss budget was very interesting because the day before the budget, the Bank of England was selling government gilts. I think a lot of the responsibility for this goes to the Bank of England, because there was an issue with derivatives to boost the amount of money generated from government gilts because gilts were so low. Because people forget interest rates were so low. They've never been that low in history. In some parts of the world, they were negative. So you've got financial institutions which are sitting on enormous losses, 40 or 50% losses. And that has to be dealt with. But there is something we can do in the UK. Labour could tomorrow say, if you have leave to remain, you no longer have access to UK benefits. Because you're a foreign worker working in the UK, you don't get any benefits in Dubai or Saudi. So why not do that? That would probably save 40 billion, and then abandon net zero. That would probably save at least 50 billion a year.
I mean trillions. Net zero is going to cost us trillions. Forget billions.
And if we have to be really careful, because if the UK is seen as the dirtiest shirt, not only will gilt prices go up, but we'll also see the pound go down. And then what will happen? That will mean that inflation will go through the roof. But
it's already creeping back up again, isn't it? And we're seeing food prices expected to go up, we're told. Again, another happy call. Simon and Baystoke, really appreciate that. And again, probably could give Rachel from accounts a few lessons on how the economy works there.
Definitely.
11:36 is the time. Up next, going to talk to Shadow Defence Minister Mark Francois about the Chagos Islands and why on earth we're giving them Mauritius, 9 billion quid to take the Chagos Islands, not even back, because they never owned them in the first place. And more on the NHS winter crisis and the data that's come out to show that A&E was its busiest ever last year. This is Talk. We are the home of common sense.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk, the Home of Common Sense with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. Philip Ingram's still with me. Get his thoughts as a former senior military intelligence officer on the Chagos Islands in just a few moments. First up, though, let's talk to the Shadow Defence Minister, Mark Francois MP. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Julia. Nice to be back on your show.
Well, lovely to speak to you in a happy New Year. Absolutely extraordinary story that's emerged in terms of the sweetener for the deal that Labour is offering Mauritius in return for bizarrely giving them the Chagos Islands, which we own in the middle of the Pacific, which Mauritius has never had any claim to whatsoever. We're not giving them back. They're ours. We lease out, we have an American military base on Diego Garcia as part of the Chagos Islands, and we're basically offering Mauritius a total of nearly 9 billion quid over 100 years to have a lease to keep that military base, and we're willing to apparently pay a load of it up front, so not just 90 million a year, they'll pay a good few billion up front. A, do we have that money? And B, why are we paying Mauritius to give them something they have no right to in the first place?
If I may say so, Julia, and a happy New Year to you, that's an extremely good summary. You could make an analogy. It's a bit like us paying the Argentinians billions and billions of pounds to allow us to keep the Falkland Islands and to allow us to use the runway at RAF Mount Pleasant. It's analogous to that. Yes. If anybody suggested that, they'd be hauled, they'd be dragged out of the House.
Can I just say, Mark, please don't give the government ideas.
Over Diego Garcia.
Don't give the government ideas. That's the sort of thing they're likely to do.
Yeah, but I mean, it's very serious, because as soon as this was announced, the president of Argentina immediately tried to revive their claim to the Falkland Islands, and we've now got the Spanish leaning on Gibraltar over the border there as well. Yep. So in international affairs, once you start to look weak on things like this, other people will come for you.
Yeah.
So, and coming back to Diego directly, it is strategic madness to allow Mauritius to have sovereignty over this, particularly because the Chinese have invested billions of dollars into Mauritius in recent years. And the risk is you would no longer have freedom of action at that base. Also, Mauritius is part of a Pan-African Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, so that would mean you couldn't base nuclear weapons at the base, and that would affect our deterrent posture. And the government are now in a desperate, tearing hurry to get this signed before the inauguration on the 20th of Jan, because the Trump administration are clearly absolutely against it. Yeah. And the Mauritians can see that, so, they've got us over a barrel.
Yeah,
So
and we're told the new Mauritian government...
going up.
Well, the new Mauritian government...
It's a mad way to negotiate.
Yeah, the new Mauritian government apparently isn't that keen on this deal anyway. Why did the Biden administration think it was a good idea, and why did the Labour government think it was a good idea? We know there had actually been talks about this, even under the Conservatives. Suddenly, this was like a top priority. I can't believe for anyone in this country, with Labour coming in, everyone was thinking, yeah, do you know what? Chagos Islands, big issue and top priority. Everyone should be dealing with this at the top level of government. I mean, for a start, most of us didn't even know where the sodding places were. I remember when it came up in the story, we were on air, we quickly went Googling Chagos Islands. I mean, why on earth did anyone think we should give the Chagos Islands to Mauritius anyway? Whose interests are being served here?
Well, let's deal with what happened under us, and then we'll come on to what's happened under Labour.
Let's not go into too much background, though.
Oh, well, OK, very quickly, officials in the Foreign Office have wanted to do this for years. Grant Shapps was the Defence Secretary. I was on the Defence Committee at the time. I had a conversation with him. I said, surely you're not going to allow this. He said, no, I will veto this in Cabinet. There is no way we're giving it up. He stopped it. And then when Cameron became Foreign Secretary, he killed it off completely. So in 1 minute, that is what happened. Yeah. Right? Labour is a government of human rights lawyers. You've got a Prime Minister who's a human rights lawyer. You've got a number of members who are senior government ministers, and they are worried about this advisory, non-legally binding opinion from the International Court of Justice. They're worried about the whole decolonisation issue. They want to look good to their international lawyer mates, And that's why they're prepared to do it.
Yeah.
And it's complete strategic madness.
Yeah, I mean, it is crazy. I mean, again, decolonisation, I don't believe it was even populated at all, was it, these islands, before we even arrived? It does seem utter madness, and it seems to me that, you know, we're doing something that clearly benefits the Chinese and a country that is in cahoots with China, who are a seriously hostile nation state and a strategic risk to this country. Why anyone in our government thinks that's a good idea? I've got serious questions about what their thought process is. I mean, but particularly worried right now that Ollie Robbins, lots of people may remember Sir Ollie Robbins. He was in the news an awful lot because he was, of course, Theresa May's chief negotiator, civil servant negotiator, during her disastrous time as Prime Minister, and her basically handing the EU on a plate pretty much anything they wanted when it came to the Brexit deal, did in fact tie Boris Johnson's hands an awful lot when he came to negotiate with David, now Lord Frost. Ollie Robbins is back in a very senior role as the chief Mandarin, the permanent secretary at the Foreign Office. How worried should we be about that, given that he's quite happy to give away Britain's best interests and the democratic wishes of the British people over Brexit when he was an advisor to Theresa May? He's now going to have a senior role advising David Lammy, of all people, as Foreign Secretary, giving a speech about people smuggling, which he's not going to do anything about. To have such a senior role in our government when it comes to not just our relations with the EU, but also our relations with any other country.
Well, Julia, you're quite right. I remember being interviewed by you at the time all about this.
Yeah.
Ollie Robbins was basically Theresa May's chief negotiator, and he was largely responsible for the so-called withdrawal agreement, which actually kept us in the EU when you read the fine print.
Yeah.
And that's why I and some of my colleagues in the Conservative Party fought desperately to stop it.
And thank God you did.
Yeah, well, bless you for that, the so-called Spartans, as we got nicknamed. So thank you for that. Anyway, but the point is, he's very well known around the EU. He's very well connected.
I bet he is.
The Europhile. And here's the really important point. If you wanted to rejoin the EU, and I passionately believe that Starmer remains a Remainer, and deep down in his heart of hearts, that's what he wants to do, you would put Ollie Robbins in the Foreign Office.
Exactly.
It's your perfect pick for that mission. And all this talk about a reset with the EU is just code, it's cover for beginning to want us to take us back into the European Union. This is not paranoia. They want us to rejoin. And I said to a friend of mine the other day, well, look, if they send Robbins to the Foreign Office, there's your sign. And lo and behold, that's what they've done.
I couldn't agree with you more on that. I wonder where you are in terms of what the about to be new sort of terror advisor for Donald Trump, Seb Gorka. He's been on this show many a time. His call for Britain to basically, well, to all intents and purposes, do our bit dealing with the ISIS terrorists by taking back those ISIS terrorists and members who are languishing in those Syrian prison camps right now, including the likes of the ISIS brides like Shamima Begum. Is he right? Should we take them back to Britain?
Well, look, America is our strongest ally on Mauritius and Diego Garcia. They, to me, have a very legitimate interest in what happens to that base. On this, though, I think this is a decision for us, the British people, who we allow into our country. I can understand the point the guy's trying to make, but nonetheless, I think that's a decision for us and our government and our parliament, and not for the United States. It's great that Assad has gone. It's brilliant that he's gone. And oh, by the way, in 2013, when we were talking about whether or not to strike Syria because Assad had used chemical weapons, who was the peer in the House of Lords that was bragging about the fact that he'd met Assad and made basically a speech in as many words saying we shouldn't? It was one Lord Ali. He of the passes for glass. People forget this. He of the passes for glasses. And he's gone very quiet now that Saddam has fallen. So we've had the Foreign Secretary saying it's wonderful that Saddam has gone and all the rest of it. Well, go and tell that to Lord Ali, who was effectively defending him in the House of Lords.
Well, yeah, Assad, yeah, indeed. Just finally, very brief, if I could, Donald Trump, extraordinary speech at his Mar-a-Lago home a couple of nights ago, talking about every NATO member should be spending 5% of GDP on defence spending. What do you think of that? We're only at 2%. Tories and Labour are both talking. We're aiming to get to 2.5%. Do you think we should be spending 5% of GDP on defence? Could we even afford to do so?
Well, when I was on the Defence Committee for many years, the Defence Committee under different chairmen consistently argued we should spend at 3%. So if you take a comparison with the Cold War, Julia, when the Berlin Wall was still up, under Margaret Thatcher in the mid to late 80s, we spent about 5%, about 5.2 at one point. So in a Cold War context, we were spending 5%. And I would argue that if you look at the war in Ukraine and you look at the threats to Taiwan from President Xi and you look at all the instability in the Middle East that we were talking about a minute ago, 2.5% is not enough.
Yeah.
So Trump, to be fair to him, said a while ago that NATO nations should spend at least, I think it was 2.5%. Yeah. And since then, or at least 2 rather, and when he said that, there were 5 European NATO nations who spent 2.
It's now gone up, but I don't know any nation right now is going to be able to afford 5. But I think we're going to end up all having to spend 5 anyway, maybe doing it sooner rather than later. Mark Francois, I'll have to leave it there. Shadow Defence Minister, Conservative MP, Mark Francois, thank you for that. Very brief word from Philip Ingram on that.
Well, on that, Trump's a business bully, so he's going to shout 5%, and then when he actually settles on 3%, everyone's going to go, oh, it wasn't that bad then. That's
fair enough. I've never thought that US taxpayers should have to fund our defence in Europe. I think we should be paying for it ourselves. 11:50 is the time. Up next, going to talk about the NHS. This is Talk, Home of Common Sense.
I'm slightly puzzled as to why we have to go through it all again in the House of Commons with political parties, both the major political parties, it seems to be posturing without any particular signs of sincerity. I'm not at all sure that another inquiry is going to make life that much harder for the perpetrators. And I'm not absolutely sure why it is we're discussing this, apart from the desire of certain American persons to intervene in our politics for reasons I don't fully understand.
Yes, I mean, it is kind of ironic that we are discussing it really as a result of Elon Musk.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk, the home of common sense. 11:53 is the time. Let's talk about the NHS right now with Dr. John Puntis. He's co-chair of the campaign group Keep Our NHS Public. Very good morning to you, John.
Good morning, Julia.
Thanks for joining us. Well, we've got some of the latest stats out on the NHS today, and it's, what a surprise, busiest year on record for emergency services over last year as winter flu pressures rage on. Got an average of over 5,400 patients a day in hospital with flu in the last week, 256 of those in critical care. It's 3.5 times higher than the same week last year, because we know we have different rates of flu and other bugs every winter. They come through, in different weeks every year as well. But we've got more than 20 trusts, I think, declaring critical incidents, exceptional demand, 50-hour waits in A&E in some hospitals. But are you surprised that the last year was the busiest year on record for A&E and ambulance services?
Not really surprised, because it reflects system-wide problems, doesn't it? So access to GPs, ambulance handover delays, A&E being full, and the issues with not having enough beds and not enough staff.
But also an ageing population.
Yes, to some extent that's true. Of course, if you age and you remain well, healthy, ageing is not necessarily an extra burden on the NHS. I don't think we should overemphasise that. But
if you have the baby boomer generation, my parents' generation, they're early 80s now, they're the people who are more likely to be stricken badly, need hospital treatment for, bad flu or, any other, COVID or any of the other respiratory illnesses, rather than someone, say, of my age who just sort of stumbles on for a month with a cold and a cough.
Indeed, and hopefully they've been targeted for flu vaccination, being in a high-risk group. But what I'm saying is that the problems in the NHS are system-wide.
Yeah.
I would argue that they're predominantly related to low staffing, low bed numbers, and underinvestment, which was a theme that was identified strongly by Lord Darcy in his report.
But this is the thing a lot of people find incredible to comprehend, is that how have we got low staffing and low bed levels when we have record levels of money going into the NHS right now?
Well, of course, if you gave the NHS £1 more each year, it would have record levels of funding. So that doesn't really...
No, we are talking of tens and tens of billions of pounds of more money. By the way, so much more money than that talk of £350 million extra a week. Way more than that more is now going into the NHS.
Well, it's not enough to meet demand, is the answer.
What would be enough?
Well, I would like us to be spending equivalent to comparable European countries like Germany, Netherlands.
We're not far off a lot of those countries, actually.
There's not?
We're not far off the spending of a lot of those countries on our healthcare.
If you look at per capita spending, we're quite a long way off, and it's
not
been
anymore. We used to be. We're not anymore.
Like 40 billion more is spent in some of the comparable European countries. So I think there is still a very big gap.
Well, 40 billion a year more, but they've got bigger populations as well. I mean, there are the different ways of making those comparisons. They also have completely different systems of healthcare. They have social insurance models, which bizarrely deliver far smaller waiting times and far better outcomes for things like cancer and heart disease and diabetes treatment. But some people, like you, are obsessed with having our monolithic state-controlled system of the NHS because you think that's the answer, despite the fact that no other country in the world other than Cuba thinks it is.
Well, there are other countries, of course. I mean, Portugal, one example, that based its NHS model on the NHS. Italy, Scandinavian countries.
I'm sorry. Those countries do not run their model. Their healthcare models are not based on the NHS anymore. They are not run like the NHS as one monolithic.
Largely based. And I think the 40 billion more relates to per capita spending. So it's not just about bigger population. Of course, they manage their services in a different way. They have social insurance. The problem with that is that adds in an additional cost to the whole thing as well. So
does that account for the 40 billion?
We argue that the NHS is still the most cost-effective way of providing comprehensive care.
It is cost-effective. There's no doubt at all about that. It's not as wasteful as actually an awful lot of other systems. Bizarre, terrifyingly. But bizarrely, the outcomes for going to the NHS as opposed to going into the French or the German or any of these other healthcare systems are worse. The NHS, as I've always said, it's a great system unless you want to actually keep people alive. It's not very good at that.
Well, I think if we were to invest in NHS staff, equipment and facilities, I think we would find that outcomes...
But the money's there.
Improve.
Huge sums of money are available right now and have been available for the last few years. Yes, there were the austerity years. Of course, there were. Choices had to be made. But there's no doubt at all there is tens and tens of billions of pounds more money now going in the NHS. What's it being spent on?
Well, the NHS always had a 4% uplift each year until about 2000, and then that has gone down. So we're actually in one of the most financially constrained periods of the NHS at the moment. Integrated care boards are having to make £8 billion worth of savings at the present time.
Yeah, well, I mean, but they've still got diversity officers and net zero officers, and everyone's still plenty of time to make TikTok videos, bizarrely. Dr. John Puntis, I have to leave it there. As you can hear the music going there, we're out of time. Co-chair of Keep Our NHS Public. Up next, going to take the news. Lots more top guests. We're going to be talking to Richard Tice, Deputy Leader of Reform UK. Plenty more besides. Stay tuned. This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Very good afternoon to you. Welcome back to the show. This is Talk, the home of common sense. I very much appreciate you joining me. I'm Julia Hartley-Brewer. Whether you're listening on DAB+ radio or on your smart speaker, watching on YouTube or on your connected device, it is absolutely fabulous to have your company today. Also, great to have the company of Philip Ingram, former senior military intelligence officer. Thank you once again for joining us, Philip. Talking, as always, a lot of sense. I'm going to get your tuppence worth. I know you always look confused. No, you do. That's why we get you in. That's why our audience.
I'll change.
Okay, yeah, don't do that. Yes, it's unfashionable these days. days. But I'll get your thoughts on all of the big topics we're talking about in this hour, including Labour MPs last night voting down the Tory demand for a new national inquiry into grooming gangs. Concerns have been raised over the definition also of Islamophobia adopted by the Labour Party, which they're talking about bringing into law, suggesting that the term grooming gangs about Muslims is racist, something raised by Kemi Badenoch. Also, an NHS hospital crippled by flu cases threatened to charge a pensioner £582 a night if she refused to give up her bed to another patient. I mean, absolutely extraordinary story, that. And deadly wildfires continuing to spread across the Los Angeles area, forcing the evacuation of more than 130,000 people, crucially involving an awful lot of Hollywood celebrities, some of whom now lost their homes, killing 5 people as homes are engulfed in the crisis. Going to talk to our old friend Donica McCarthy about this, but how much of this is down to, climate change, and how much of this is down to bad forest management and lack of water. We're told to be massive issues in terms of the cuts to the fire department in LA, etc. We'll talk about all of that. Plus, it has been revealed that the 14-year-old boy who was stabbed to death on a London bus in broad daylight earlier this week was, as they always are, he's either going to be an aspiring footballer or he's an aspiring musician. Well, he's an aspiring drill rapper. One of his videos has been seen online. But his mother said she wasn't surprised that this was how he died, which is an extraordinary thing for a mother to say about her 14-year-old son. It turns out he'd been taken into care. He'd spent a year living on the streets, and she says he was groomed by gangs. Is he going to be written off the same way we wrote off those working-class white girls in Rotherham and Rochdale and Telford and Oxford and elsewhere? Because, well, she's having sex with men twice her age. Yeah, but she's just a child prostitute. She's just a little slut. Well, yeah, he's a 14-year-old. He probably had a knife himself. He gets into a knife fight. He's in gangs. What do you expect? But why isn't your kid in a gang? Why isn't my kid in a gang? Why isn't your kid being groomed by the local kebab owner or taxi driver where you live? And why are they going for certain people? Why are certain kids getting involved in these gangs? Why are certain children being targeted by groomers and rapists? These are an issue that actually, we just don't care in this country about working class kids. The authorities don't seem to care. They turn a blind eye. I'm telling you what, if it was Sadiq Khan's son who was stabbed on a bus, God forbid, if it was my child stabbed on a bus, all hell would be breaking out. Just another 14-year-old black working class kid. So it doesn't really matter, does it? That is the message that goes out. I want to talk about that coming up. Lots and lots more to talk about. Our guests in this hour include Richard Tice, the Deputy Leader of Reform UK. As I said, Donica McCarthy. We're also going to be talking to the knife crime campaigner Ken Hines as well. Philip Ingham, before we go to our first guest on the grooming gang inquiry, what did you make of the vote last night? Was it right for the government to basically whip their MPs to vote against Kemi Badenoch's demand for an amendment attached to another bill, which did involve some child safeguarding issues as well as child educational changes, which I didn't agree with, but basically saying, look, there needs to be a national public inquiry with statutory powers, ability to ask people questions under oath, to get to the bottom, as she said in PMQs yesterday, to join the dots when it comes to these thousands and thousands of girls who've been groomed by gangs and raped en masse over 25 years in 50-plus towns and cities across the country. Was the government right to say no?
Well, the government was always going to say no, and Kemi Badenoch knew that, but also knew that by bringing this topic out, it would detract from a lot of the debate that went on around the bill. The bill is flawed in so many different ways by dumbing down education across England, it was a bad bill. But anything that goes through Labour that Labour are putting as a flagship bill is always going to get through, given the majority that they've got. Yeah. Should there be an inquiry? Yes, of course there should be an inquiry. That could have been announced in parallel to it. But I think the thing that has let the government down with regard to the vote last night in this bill is that the fact that the Prime Minister, the Deputy Prime Minister and the Chancellor of the Exchequer didn't vote. They abstained.
Yeah, it's absolutely extraordinary, isn't it? I do welcome your thoughts on this. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. Also, we'll be talking a lot this show about Chancellor Rachel Reeves possibly having to make emergency spending cuts or raise more taxes in March when she makes her next announcement on government spending, as government borrowing costs have soared higher than after Liz Truss's end 2022 mini-budget. Oh, everyone was all over that, up in arms, clutching their pearls, were they not? Forced her and her Chancellor Kwasi Kwarteng from office. apparently not an issue when it happens under Rachel Reeves and Keir Starmer. Wonder what your reaction is to that. Give us a call, 0344 499 1000. You can text TALK and your message to 87222. Get in touch on X at talkTV. Calls are charged at the national rate. Text costs one standard network rate message. Do our best. Got a lot packed hour ahead, but do our best to get some more calls on air. Right now, let's talk more about the grooming and rape gangs inquiry with Jonathan Taylor. He's a child safeguarding consultant and a former detective who worked for 15 years on child abuse investigations. A very good afternoon to you, Jonathan.
Good afternoon.
Thanks for joining us. Now, I mean, look, you, given your work on both sides of these issues, will have known far more the horrific details long before certainly the likes of Elon Musk found out about them and started tweeting about them over New Year, and indeed many members of the public who perhaps had just not wanted to know a lot of the horrific details of what a lot of these girls have gone through on a grand scale in so many of our towns and cities. Do you think there should be a national public inquiry into this?
Julia, yes, there should be. And like Philip just said, it was no surprise that the vote went that way. That was the way it was always going to be. It wasn't a free vote, it was a whip vote. We knew what the outcome was going to be. And that was the way it went through. But what's really sort of annoyed me or upset me is when they talk about the recommendations that came out from the 2022. But those recommendations didn't go into actually the nitty-gritty of the methodology, typology of these actual offenders. And it seems even then you couldn't talk about British Pakistani men who were over 80% going to be the identity of these child rapists, these child sex offenders.
Yeah.
And it's a lot to this, but at the end of the day, the survivors are being let down because the survivors have needed this confidence to report. Having dealt with survivors, very young survivors, over my period of working as a detective, it took so much courage to come through, come forward. And it meant that they wanted to be not just believed, they wanted to be heard by people in positions who could actually make a change, could support them. And that's why the National Inquiry, if we did that and got people in, because we've got to look at the fact that you've got councillors, MPs, Department of Public Prosecution, CPS, police officers, social services, high position, basically turned around and said, don't investigate, leave it alone. And that's wrong.
Yeah, I mean that's the extraordinary thing. People still want it to be swept under the carpet. Extraordinarily, one of the more prominent victims who has been so brave in speaking out is Sammy Woodhouse. She tweeted last night, I've received a phone call from South Yorkshire Police tonight about my reporting on X, on Twitter. They've asked me to delete posts and not to report on Rotherham professionals moving forward, even though they've got no reporting restrictions on the case. She said the information she's reported came directly from South Yorkshire Police over 6 months ago and has been in the public domain already. I mean, it's just extraordinary that people being told be quiet. We've even had, tutting and booing at, the Shadow Home Secretary, Chris Philp, at Rupert Lowe, the Reform MP in Parliament. Yeah, you can have political differences and disagree with people, but tutting and booing people, talking openly about stuff, is exactly what meant the reason why this was allowed to carry on for so long, because when MPs like Anne Cryer, Sarah Champion, others did speak up, when Andrew Norfolk, the Times journalist who broke this in the media in 2011, 2012, when he wrote these articles, everyone just shouted racist and Islamophobe at these people, and that's what put other people off from saying anything other than the likes of, Tommy Robinson, and it just went down that route. At the same time, these girls, in their thousands, were sacrificed on that altar of political correctness.
I've had the pleasure of meeting Sammy and speaking with her at conferences, and the bravery that she shows.
Oh,
so, yeah, it's incredible. And I was pointing out just yesterday the fact that what we've also got to understand, we use this word grooming, and grooming did occur. Now, grooming can be online, it can be offline. But the offline grooming, what we're talking about here, is organised crime groups. It's organised crime gangs. It's not an individual that's actually grooming a young girl. These are young British Pakistani men who go out to target young, vulnerable white girls in those areas, 45 to 50 cities and towns, deliberately to put them into prostitution so they get raped. That's what we're talking about here. And of course, it's one of these things where, people talk about grooming, they still think about this, perhaps this man that's on the internet. This is completely different.
Yeah.
This is the fact, there's organised crime groups. And of course, by coincidence, you had Keir Starmer saying he's great at getting rid of these gangs.
Yeah.
Well, you've got them on your own doorstep. Let's go into it. Let's actually work harder and actually give us not just survivors hope and confidence, but it actually allows the detectives on the ground to not worry about when they start labelling people, because this is fact-based. It's not made up.
Yeah,
it's
and that's the bizarre thing, isn't it? And again, you know, it is relevant when we do. I'm amazed. You know, if I apply for a library card at my local library, or I go and do anything, I'm asked for my ethnicity, I'm asked for my religion. Oh, for data keeping purposes. Apparently, we don't think it's relevant when it's a particular crime, even when there is a racial and a religious aspect to the abuse, because a lot of these girls, and it came up in many of the court cases, said, you know, that they were talked about as, you know, white slags, as, you know, as white trash. And, you know, the former Home and Foreign Secretary, Jack Straw, talking about how they were regarded as easy meat because they weren't Muslim girls of Pakistani origin, because they were other than. I mean, it's relevant, it's always been relevant, and yet even mentioning it somehow means you're beyond the pale. I just want to ask you, though, crucially on this, is... do you think that the people who allowed this to happen... I mean, we saw people allow, you know, Jimmy Savile to abuse kids in hospital because, well, he gave a load of money to Great Ormond Street, so it's OK. You know, he raises money for charity. We've seen, you know, please, you know, so the churches, Church of England, Catholic Church, probably every church, covering up abuse by their priests because, you know, the institutional, reputational damage and the like. What do you think was the motivation of people who could see it happening? They knew that these 11, 12, 13, 14-year-old girls were being raped. They were being drugged and given alcohol, or were being raped en masse. They were being picked up from school, from their care homes. They knew there were vulnerable kids. They knew all the modus operandi. They knew all this. They don't live in rarefied towers. They know that this is what's going on the streets. When they didn't speak up, when they didn't act to stop it, were they afraid? Did they just not care? Or did they think that these girls were expendable, or what else? What do you think, as someone who's worked in this field?
Yeah, you've touched on a lot of things there, and I think if you go back, we're talking 30, 40 years. I know 25 years has been mentioned, but it goes back longer than that. I'd say this is organised crime. So I think the first time it happened was that people said, just didn't believe it, because you've got one person perhaps disclosing. But then it balls up and think, hang on a minute, we've actually got more survivors, we've got more people actually disclosing this could happen, but it becomes a political time bomb here. And when people must understand that if you've got an investigation, it has to be authorised. It can't just be a detective on his own or detective sergeant. It has to come from higher up. Now, of course, they don't do any of the investigations, but they might now see things, and they've got people then in position of power, whether that's political power or actually celebrity power. Yeah. So you've then got that situation whereby senior officers, you've also got senior councillors, you've got MPs, you've got everyone who will then think, hang on a minute, I can't go down this, it's a hot potato, I will start to get labelled. So you've got this progression of just not believing, and then it's a question of themselves thinking, well, I might lose face, I might be called racist, I might not get the next rank, I might not get the next position. That then comes into it. You know, because the funny thing about this sort of crime, and if you think about the evidence that's required, it comes direct from survivors of awful, awful sexual abuse. And what's interesting, Julie, I was actually talking to an ex-colleague just about last week about this. When we operated in an undercover capacity, now if you look at this situation, if you've got an 80 to 90% predominantly British Muslim Pakistani offender, you've got to get an officer that's going to actually fit in with that. So you've actually then got to say, have you got a British, Asian police officer who's trained? So we're actually going to be fact-based, we're going to do it. That's what has to happen. But these people that have in many ways covered it up, ignored it or swept it under the carpet, they should be held to account.
And that's the crucial thing. I mean, again, if we do have an inquiry, and it does take years, Keir Starmer was defending it, PMQs yesterday, look, it just take years and years if we do this. A, I don't see why these things do need to take so long, but B, while you're having an inquiry shouldn't mean we've got to stop a situation where, there's an inquiry going on, so we have to stop the police investigations. We need to be going in, we need every whistleblower, every victim to come forward, we need somewhere trusted they can come to, and they can say, name the names, name the people who did not act, who knew, and let's start going after those people. Jonathan Taylor, real pleasure to speak to you. Thank you for joining us. Great to hear your expertise. A former detective, spent 15 years in child abuse investigations, now working in child safeguarding. Well, we're going to talk about this and plenty more things, including the economy. Oh, yeah, and lovely Sir Ollie Robbins, who tried to scupper us over Brexit, who's Theresa May's advisor on her horrifically terrible withdrawal agreement for Brexit, which wasn't really Brexit at all. He's now basically running the show in the Foreign Office. We'll talk about all of that to Reform UK's Deputy Leader Richard Tice in the studio next. Stay tuned. This is Talk.
2 days ago, a 14-year-old boy stabbed on the bus in broad daylight. Something has to change. Real action is required, and that's why we're asking the Mayor to declare a public order emergency and to really ramp up a range of initiatives that would help get back on top of this. So we want to see a dramatic increase in stop and search, particularly in hotspot areas. We want to boost police presence, and we want weapon sweeps across key areas in the capital. It's only by taking real action and real steps that we can get on top of this crisis before it gets any worse. Otherwise, we'll be on course for yet another record year of knife crime in our capital city, and it's simply not good enough.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk, the home of common sense. Thank you very much indeed for joining me. I'm Julia Hartley-Brewer. Philip Ingham is still with me, but we've shuffled you to the side because Richard Tice, I love that, he's not happy about that. Richard Tice, Deputy Leader of Reform UK and MP, of course, has joined us in the studio. A very good morning and a Happy New Year.
Good afternoon,
Happy New Year.
Absolutely,
sorry.
yes.
Lots to talk about. Let's talk first of all about the vote last night. The Tories, Kemi Badenoch, had pushed for the vote for there to be basically a national statutory public inquiry into the grooming and rape gangs involving white working class girls being raped en masse and no one doing anything about it pretty much for 20 odd years. The government whipped against that. It's got voted down. There does seem to be some softening on this issue. Why do you think a public inquiry is needed?
Because the fact is that there hasn't been a dedicated examination across dozens of towns of what's really gone on.
As Kemi Badenoch said, joining the dots.
And that's the point. And the reality is, yes, victims and survivors want action, But actually, we could also have a dedicated short inquiry, let's say a year, and that's what we're calling for. That's what I called for in the chamber yesterday.
Yeah, they don't need to take 7 years and cost 200 million quid,
you don't need to take 3 or 5 years. Do it just employ the right number of people to get it done, if necessary, 24/7, because victims and survivors want to know answers. Who knew what when? Who covered up what when in dozens of towns up and down England?
We do need names. We want to. Who knew? Who didn't know? Tell us the name of your social worker that you told. Tell us the name of your teacher.
And it's not good enough. What was said in the chamber against me was that, well, the Jay inquiry by Professor Jay included a sort of subset, but that I've looked in detail at it. They only interviewed 6 witnesses. 6, for heaven's sake.
They didn't even interview people like Maggie Oliver, the Rochdale whistleblower.
So this was frankly just not enough. And we've got to get answers, and I think that the Labour Party and the Keir Starmer is completely out of touch with the mood of the people.
What did you make of, I mean, you know, Chris Philp, not in your party, Shadow Home Secretary, he got sort of booed when he was talking about this issue and how, you know, the political point scoring was the accusation. Rupert Lowe, your colleague, praised by Elon Musk, interestingly. He made some very good points, I think, on social media and also in a speech in Parliament where, you know, a question where he literally said, these are the questions we need to know. How many, you know, we want data, he wants specific answers. How many children were born? How many... he wants all the details. But tutted at, booed.
Oh, the atmosphere in the chamber was actually really toxic. But I think those Labour MPs, they might have thought they were clever on the day. I think they will look at their inboxes over the next few days, they'll go back to their constituencies, and I think they will be horrified by the onslaught they get. And I think there is a softening of the Labour Party's position. I think within a week we will see something happen. They might call it something else.
Yes.
But to sort of, you know, but I think, in fact, the Prime Minister was much more measured at PMQs than he was in his speech a couple of days ago when he accused anybody of wanting an inquiry as being associated with the far right.
Well, we're all far right now if you ask to find out the details about these grooming gangs.
The whole term's been sort of utterly sort of debased. It's ridiculous. But it's really serious and we need to know.
This issue, I mean, this is something that, you know, Tommy Robinson has made a lot of noise about, and, you know, and good for him. Again, people will say, like, oh, you know, you're hating Tommy Robinson. No, I'm just saying there are things that he's done and said over the years which have been valid and worthwhile and people should have paid attention to, and things that he has done that are very wrong. There's a reason why he's behind bars right now, not a political prisoner. However, his cause, effectively, allied with this issue, is why Elon Musk was basically rather critical of your party leader and your good friend, Nigel Farage, saying he's not up to the job of leading your party anymore. He seemed to think that Rupert Lowe was the man for the job. Now, where are you with Elon Musk right now? 1 minute he was apparently going to give you $100 million, and there's visits and everyone's shaking hands and posing in front of for photographs. Next minute, he's saying he wants none of it.
Look, you can be friends with someone and respect their incredible brilliance as a fantastic entrepreneur. I love his products, including Tesla. But equally, life would be boring if you agreed on everything. And on this particular issue, we agree on free speech. You know...
Well, Nigel Farage made that point.
Absolutely. But here's the point. We've got convictions.
The response to Nigel Farage saying, look, we can agree to differ on certain issues, was Elon Musk basically saying he's not up to the job of leading your party.
Yeah, and look, that's the point about free speech. He's entitled to his view, but he's
also entitled to keep his money.
Of course, and do you know what? But that's the point. Actually, we've shown strength, real strength, by showing that we're people of conviction and principles. We're not for sale to anybody. We know what's right, we know what's wrong, and in the nicest possible way, we are a fast-growing party. As at today, we're now polling with one poll, equal joint. You know, we're looking to taking control, you know, to basically being the largest party at the next general election. And look,
that is your plan.
That is the plan. Mr. Robinson, he's in jail, not for the first time. And, you know, he's nothing to do with reform. He would never be anything to do with reform. We're crystal clear on that, just so anybody's under any illusion whatsoever.
Certainly from our audience, there's been a lot of praise for your and Nigel Farage's decision on this issue. But we see, though, $100 million would have been quite handy. I will come to local elections and that poll in a moment, but I want to ask you about, obviously, the story which It's not the most important story of the day because celebrities losing their homes in California is apparently the most important story for the BBC and other major outlets because, you know, the old adage from local newspapers, and, you know, if it bleeds, it leads. And those certainly the images of the fires in California are horrific. And, of course, you know, 130,000 people leaving, lots of people losing their homes, more crucially, 5 people dead. Obviously a very, very important, serious story. However, it is something happening on the other side of the world. It's something that happens all the time. What doesn't happen all the time is the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, as she is now, having to make an announcement of emergency spending cuts or announcement of raising yet more taxes in March because government borrowing costs have soared higher than they were in 2022 when Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng announced that 2022 mini budget. At that point, everyone completely lost their minds. Massive criticism of her and of Kwasi Kwarteng. She sacked her Chancellor. She then later had to fall on her sword, lasted only 49 days in office as PM because of that massive extra hike in the cost of borrowing and the damage in the markets. It's now higher. What is your reaction to that, and indeed the political coverage of
this? The reality is that the Labour government's blunder budget has collapsed confidence. Sterling is falling, investment is falling, jobs are falling. The only thing that's going up, as I've just said in the House of Commons before I came here, is inflation's going up and the cost of debt is soaring. And that means that the cost of mortgages very quickly will be soaring. And if we're not very careful, if the government doesn't change course and cut this vast amount of wasteful spending that we all know is going on, cut daft regulations and create some growth, then we are heading towards a financial crisis. Be under no illusion. And the Labour front bench and the Labour Party, they have no idea what they're talking about. They think you can just keep printing money. You can't. And the bond market experts that I've been speaking to in recent days are very, very anxious.
You don't realistically expect Labour to do any of those things.
Of course not.
In which case, we had a caller earlier saying, you know, he runs a business, he runs a construction business, does extensions. He had 2 big extensions, but both of those cancelled. He's had to lay off a young lad he's hired. He's got a young baby. He can't pay his bills. You know, there is a knock-on effect that won't be happening to just his company. It'll be happening across the board. Lots of employers, especially the National Insurance hike, £25 billion extra tax on businesses employing people in this country. How bad do you think it's all going to get?
Well, I've just said in the chamber, I've nailed my colours on the mast. I don't know when, but I'm afraid to say I think we are heading to a difficult place. It's just a question of how difficult and how soon. And you just can't keep spending more than you are earning in any walk of life, whether it's a small business, a personal budget at home, or when you're running the country, and expect your lenders just to keep lending you money. At some point, they will say no, and that is what the financial markets are now looking at. And what happens is you get a herd instinct, and they can smell blood. And my concern is the markets fairly soon are smelling blood.
The cost of servicing our debt currently in Britain, one of the biggest economies in the world, is now more than the cost of servicing the debt of Greece, a basket case.
It's not a great look. It's really, I mean, Greece is a wonderful place to go on holiday.
Why do you think this isn't leading the BBC today?
Oh, funny that. Well, look, you have to ask them.
It got a brief mention on the Today programme.
Yeah, look, this is the key issue facing the country today. The government's been in power for 6 months. We had the budget at the end of October, and they seem to have forgotten the last 2 months of GDP data in September, October, both down. We're heading into recession.
But we do have money because we're about to give £9 billion in total, 90 million a year, but a lot of that money basically given in the first few years to Mauritius to give them the Chagos Islands, to which they have remotely no claim whatsoever. Islands many thousands of miles away. So we do have the money.
No, we don't. This is unfunded spending. You know, the Labour Party bang on about unfunded tax cuts. There's no such thing as unfunded spending, and we haven't got that $9 billion to pay to Chagos to take away our own freehold that we currently own. We haven't got $22 billion to spend on climate change. We haven't got all of these billions to spend on this, this sort of great British energy. We are in a really bad place, and we've got to reverse course.
What did you make of that warning last night given out that between the hours of 4 and 7 p.m. last night we could possibly face blackouts, and they were going to have to work with, I think it was £2 million per hour was being spent by British taxpayers on keeping gas power stations working because it was very, very cold and we needed our heating and people wanted to make their dinner, put the kettle on, put the telly on, but we didn't have very much wind. This is often the case in the depths of winter, and therefore we needed gas power to power electricity, as we do pretty much all of the time. What do you make of a first world country, the 21st century, not being able to
January
keep the
comes
lights
around
on?
every year, and guess what?
Can you tell the NHS that? They're not sure about that.
It's always cold in January, by and large, and we always need more energy to heat people up, keep people warm in January. So this is no surprise, but if you rely on renewables and you get what's called a Dunkelflaut, which is about the only German word I know, which means there's no wind, there's no sun, there's low cloud, we're in the doo-doo if we haven't got lots of gas and lots of nuclear-created electricity to keep people warm. And that's the situation. And so what's happening is net zero is driving our bills up, it's driving up the cost of living, it's driving down our economy, it's killing jobs, and it's another reason why we are heading towards a real crisis. And the dots are being joined by people in the city, and it's only reform that calls this out.
Okay. I'm not to make light of this, but I did not in my January bingo card have Dunkelflaut and Doo-Doo in the same interview. I did not. I'm just saying that. Just funny. You guys have got yourself in a tizzy about the local elections. Now, there's a decision to local councils, largely Tory-controlled local councils, being asked by the Labour government to postpone local elections by a few months. They're due on May the 1st, to delay them, some for up to a whole year, over these big changes announced by Angela Rayner, the Deputy Prime Minister, where you're taking where you've got sort of district council, county council, everyone all on top of each other, taking out a layer. I'm sure they'll end up employing the same number of people. Who are we kidding? It's Labour making these reforms.
They won't when we take charge.
Okay, but basically taking them out. And basically, instead of having an election on May the 1st to then have a completely big organisation having another set of elections, postponing those elections. Now, there was a lot of talk that you guys, with or without Elon Musk's money, Reform UK, riding ahead in the polls, doing well, that you could make a big show in local elections. Look, we can take a council, we could run a council. This is your big opportunity to show a little bit of, of progress since the election on July the 4th. Is this an issue? Because you're still going to get those local elections.
Yeah, we'll
They're
get
not banning local elections.
No, well, look, whenever the elections are, there'll be some elections, but a lot less than was previously forecast. Wherever they are, we will be fighting hard. There's also some mayoral elections. We think we can do extremely well in them. We're going to be very focused. The truth is, local councils need root and branch review and reform. There is just waste everywhere. And we're going to be saying to people, this is what we've got to do. We've got to relook at everything and rewire the way we run councils, we run devolved nations like Wales and Scotland, and actually look at a complete review and reform of the way we run the country. So that's our stepping stone. We want voters to give us the opportunity to run a council and show that we can make that work. And then we're looking forward to, obviously, the devolved nation elections in the Senedd in Wales and Holyrood in Scotland in May 2026.
But there's a lot of claim from people your side saying, this is an attack on democracy. Is it an attack on democracy? Or, should we not make those claims when it isn't? We had elections delayed before.
Let's see what happens. It's not a great look delaying elections.
But if there's a reason to delay
the elections. If some are delayed and the reasons are clear and well explained...
They have been.
Well, ish. It's not yet confirmed. Let's see. But whatever elections there are, we will fight them and, hopefully win some and show people what we can do. That's the plan.
OK. Richard Tice, very much appreciate you joining. You're Deputy Leader of Reform UK. On whichever you want to come back on, for Philip Ingram, a brief word from you.
Well, I was going to say that the government is missing a real opportunity here. We should have the UK where we've got devolved governments for each of the elements of the UK. So we should create an English Parliament. And then do a root and branch review of what Westminster does to look after the whole of the United Kingdom, and then an English Parliament can decide how England is properly governed with mayors and local councils and all the rest of it.
It's just another layer. It's just another layer of people.
But then, Philip, what do we do in Westminster? I mean, there wouldn't be much for us to do.
Yeah, here's the question. What do you do at Westminster? Anyway, Richard Tice, great to have you in the studio. Thanks for Philip Ingram. Up next, going to talk about those California wildfires with your friend and mine, Donica McCarthy, and also talking about that 14-year-old a stabbing victim. His mother said she wasn't even surprised when her 14-year-old was stabbed to death on a bus in South London. What a thing for a mother to say, but maybe she was right. We'll talk about that with knife crime campaigner Ken Hines. This is Talk, the home of common sense.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Very good afternoon to you. This is Talk, the Home of Common Sense. 12:38 is the time. Philip Ingram is still with me. We're joined right now by Donica McCarthy, Director of Climate Media Coalition. A very good afternoon. A happy new year to you, Donica.
Happy New Year to you, Julia.
Thanks for joining us. Now, these California wildfires have been leading the news pretty much everywhere else. Talked about them briefly on the show yesterday. I'm not entirely sure that what's happening. 130,000 people evacuated. Very sadly, 5 people dying. It's very, very tragic. And of course, lots of celebrities, very rich people losing their multi-million-pound mansions. Obviously, it makes it more a newsworthy story. But in all the coverage of this, I mean, there's always a little bit of a chat about climate change being to mention. Now, that's often mentioned when we talk about big heat waves in the middle of the summer, but it's January. There aren't normally wildfires in California in January, partly because of the heat, partly because there are not people who are out and about. Most of these fires are man-made, as you know. Is this caused by climate change, Donica?
Well, there have, as you know, and we've also agreed many times, Julia, there are natural wildfires taking place right across the planet. There always have been wildfires in California. However, the background research shows a number of things. First of all, average temperatures in California are now up 1.6 degrees over the historic record, which means the land is drier. Secondly, the research in journal Nature says there's a 25% chance, higher chance now, of wildfires in California due to climate crisis. And the third area of research by NISDEC shows that the area covered by wildfires in California has nearly doubled over the 60-year period of historical record, and they attribute that to climate change. So there is...
Well, everyone attributes...
always happened in California.
A lot of people saying it, but the reality is, as we know, when there have been wildfires many other places and in California, some of the issue has been a failure to clear very dry debris, the sort of environmental plans that, the policies where there hasn't been the mass clearing. We've also seen massive issues with the fire department in California, have we not? Where we've seen massive cuts to the police and the fire department. We've also seen huge amount of extra building. There's been concerns fire hydrants haven't been working, a shortage of water in some of the reservoirs in some of the areas, and a lack of equipment. Apparently, an awful lot of the equipment they had was sent off to help people in Ukraine. Great for people in Ukraine, not so good for people who own houses in California, though. I mean, a lot of these are, as we see with other issues in other countries, and we saw it with Hawaii, those horrific wildfires that burnt down right to the beach in Hawaii, caused mass devastation, that actually it was down to an awful lot of failure of management of the local environment that has been done for centuries and is no longer being done.
Los Angeles Fire Department has said that they have not been equipped to deal with 4 huge wildfires simultaneously. They're actually now reckoning that they have to up their game to deal with the increased risk of wildfires caused in part by climate change. So you're right, there are human things.
But why would climate change be causing wildfires in January? Donica, why would it's not 45, Donica? It's not 45 degrees in January in California. I was in Sicily, a couple of years ago when we had...
Well, in California, they have had 2% of the normal winter rainfall. It is extremely dry. That is why there is an increased fire risk currently. They've had Los Angeles has had the driest winter, summer and autumn in their history. So there is...
well, it's not in their history. Since records began in probably 1980.
Driest summer and autumn in Los Angeles in their history. Now, what you actually mentioned quite rightly, this is affecting lots of very, very rich people. People like Paris Hilton, who has 5 homes, 3 in Los Angeles alone. And actually her private Our private jet lifestyle of the 1% is a significant problem. I don't know if you know, Julia, but there is an interesting social justice issue. The top 1% emit more than the 2/3 poorest part of humanity.
How terrible. How dare they live nice lives?
No. The issue is that the link between their carbon emissions and the impact on everybody is actually now coming to the fore. And what actually I think is very interesting is, and talking about, Richard Tice recently talked about who funds this. The Brazilian government, which is heading the COP conference this autumn are proposing a tax on the top 100 richest families in the world, which would raise £250 billion. And you know what will happen next year? They will be even richer. So actually, we do have the money to do this, and the poor should not be paying the price.
Well, no, what would really help poor people, of course, would be if they could have access to cheap and affordable and reliable fossil fuels, whether they are in California, in Britain, or in a third world country, so that they can actually develop industry and they could live better quality lives in their own homes.
We totally agree that the poor should have cheap, affordable, reliable energy. And
that's fossil fuels.
We just listened to Richard Tice saying he wants us to be fuelled in winter by nuclear and by gas.
Reliable energy.
If you look at the recent cost of those fuels, according to the Department of the Environment, if you look at it, onshore wind, £41 per megawatt, offshore wind £44 per megawatt, gas is £114 per megawatt, and nuclear is even more. So
you know why gas is more expensive? Donica, you have to stop speaking at some point.
They want consumers. Reform want consumers to pay for the most expensive.
Donica, my love, gas costs more because we're using gas intermittently for fueling our electricity, and because we're importing it because we don't have enough production in our own country. What did you make?
That's not true. That's completely no.
You do this a lot. You say that's not true.
That is not true. Unless you want
those things are true. They're facts.
I am sure that you, Julia, are not committed to nationalising our gas and oil industry. And unless you nationalise our gas industry, we will be paying for gas at international levels. So no matter how much gas we produce in the country, the cost will not come down because it's dependent on international prices.
International prices, yes. Isn't it weird, though, how America has much lower prices than us, and indeed most of Europe has much lower prices than us, where they aren't reliant on wind and solar energy? Let me put a question.
The reason why we have expensive electricity in this country is because the electricity price is linked to the price of the most expensive electricity on the grid at any particular time.
It's a mad... Our entire energy system is mad, Donica. On that we can agree. Can I ask you, last night...
The Daily Mail agrees with me on this one.
Donica, everyone agrees on this one because it is insane. Last night, you had a warning that between 4 and 7 p.m. on Wednesday evening, forecasts from the National Energy System said are showing tight margins on the electricity system. Basically, we had to pay £2 million every hour to power up the gas power stations because it was a very cold day. And what a surprise, in January people wanted to have their heating on and put the kettle on and watch telly and make their dinner for the evening. Maybe, I don't know, put a load of laundry on as well. And we didn't have the energy for that without powering up the gas power stations at the cost of £2 million an hour extra on because we didn't have wind. We didn't have wind. Therefore, we didn't have wind power to help with our electricity needs. This is the basic problem, isn't it? Wind and solar are not reliable, consistent forms of energy.
They've been saying that we're going to have blackouts because of wind energy since for 20 years.
They're just making it up, aren't
they said that they wouldn't make up, and they would never produce a realistic amount of energy. Last year, for the first time ever, wind produced more energy than fossil fuels. Fossil fuels now is only 26% of the grid. And what you seem to be arguing is that rather than using gas on the rare times we need it in cold...
It's not rare, it's routine.
It's only 26% of the time last year we used gas on the grid.
I hate to tell you, I quite like being able to put the lights on and have the fridge working.
You always have been. My lights are on
100% of the time.
I've got solar.
I don't live in a mud hut in Africa. I expect to have electricity 24/7, 365.
We have.
We only have because we've got nuclear power and gas power stations.
And you're shouting louder and louder.
Well, because I have to, because you won't stop talking. Donica, wind power and solar could operate 99.9% of the time, but what 0.1% of the time we'd still need to have gas or nuclear or something else.
Absolutely. Well, you're totally agreeing.
Exactly, because they're not reliable.
No, well, stop shouting me. If we can have actually cheap renewables for 95% of the time,
they're
and
not cheap. They're subsidised.
They're not. They were subsidised.
They are subsidised.
Get up to date. Get up to date, Julia. You were right 10, 15 years ago. The current new contracts don't require subsidies. And what you're arguing, what Richard Tice is arguing for, is because we don't have cheap renewables 99% of the time, you actually want us to have expensive gas and expensive nuclear 100% of the time. It's utterly insane.
Genuinely, Donica, I don't think anything you said was actually factually accurate. I'm really sorry.
Actually,
look,
I am actually quoting the figures from the Department of the Environment. If you look at
well, in that case, the Department of Environment absolutely know what they're doing.
There's no stats that I will quote, no authority I will quote that you would believe in. I don't know how to deal with that, but I can only quote the current cost of a megawatt of gas electricity is £114. A megawatt.
Unfortunately, the true costs are not added into how we. Right. We're just going to talk over each other. We're going to have to go anyway because I've got to go to a break. But Donica, always a pleasure. Donica McCarthy, Director of the Climate Media Coalition. Philip Ingram?
Donica sidestepped the big issue that there is with wind and solar power in that you can't store it. And therefore, whenever there are surges and there's a requirement in winter, and we all want IOL, instant on lighting.
Yeah, well, not want, we require.
Yeah, exactly.
No, but this is the point. You have to run a nuclear power station and a gas power station as backup all the time, or you import it.
Exactly.
It's crazy. Why are all these countries that are fracking having lower costs? Oh, they still have to deal with the international market. There's a difference when you're a purchaser and a net importer on the international market as opposed to when you're a net exporter on the international market.
And our energy policy is crazy. We're importing instead of using our own domestically available energy.
It was insane under the Tories. It's more insane under Labour. I didn't think it could happen. It really has happened. So, I mean, again, this nonsense. It's not reliable. It's not secure, and it's not cheaper. It isn't. If you have to have backup for it, it's not just like going, oh, my electric car's so cheap. Well, apart from the fact you have to have a petrol or diesel car as well, just in case. It's madness. 12:50 is the time. We're going to go to break. Going to talk to Ken Hines, the knife crime campaigner, about that stabbing of a 14-year-old boy who died on a bus in broad daylight in London earlier this week. His mother was not surprised by the mode of his death. That's a terrible thing to say, but why did she say it? That's up next. This is Talk.
This man who leads our country should be so out of touch with how the people that he is supposed to represent feel. You know, I am rarely really triggered by politicians. You know, I spend all my time listening to their verbiage. But that comment actually really gets me because it is so insulting to voters. It's so insulting to all those children who were abused.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk, the Home of Common Sense. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm Julia Hartley-Brewer. Philip Ingram's still with me. I'll get his thoughts in a moment on what the next story. And this is the story of the 14-year-old who was stabbed to death on a London bus in broad daylight earlier this week on Tuesday afternoon. First day back at school for many people. And his name is Julian Jessup, and he died 2 weeks after he'd laid flowers at the scene where another knife attack victim had died. His mother, Mary Jessup, said she was not surprised that her son had died this way. He'd got involved with gangs. He'd been in care. He'd lived on the streets for a year. She thinks he may have got involved with a group, with a gang, and indeed with drugs as well. Is he more than just a victim of this stabbing? Is he also just a victim of a system which, in the same way as those white working class girls in Rotherham and Rochdale, Telford and Oxford and elsewhere, just simply didn't matter to the authorities? Let's talk to Ken Hines. He's a knife crime and stop and search campaigner and joins us. Good afternoon to you, Ken.
Yeah, good afternoon, Julia. Just like to first of all, just give my condolence to the mother and others that's affected by the tragic loss of this young boy.
Yeah, I mean, it was fascinating. As soon as images of him came up, and there he is. He's an aspiring drill rapper, and he's miming with a gun and a knife, and people were going, oh well, he's involved in gangs, and I could immediately see people going, oh well, another little gangster killing another little gangster. We will probably, may have known the identity at some point of his killer, and it'll be another young lad like him, and people write it off. But is this actually just the same writing off of young black boys from working class families that we've seen as the writing off of young white girls from working class families in the grooming and rape gang cases? That actually they're seen as kind of perpetrators rather than victims?
My thing is that I honestly believe that what we're doing is focusing on the youngster rather than giving the support that he's required to raise his self-esteem. Unfortunately, I could see myself as a perpetrator around a similar age, doing something not distant from this. But I fortunately have evolved from this and realised that what my trouble was, it was the low self-esteem and the sort of people I had around me.
Yeah.
Now, what I've seen all too often, we're empowering young people, but we're not teaching them the responsibility that goes.
Well, it's all about this mad notion of respect, which never the T at the end. Respect, it's demanding it, but not actually, as you say, is having self-respect. But again, we talk about the mother. No mention of a dad. I doubt dad was involved. Kid gets taken into care. I'm guessing went off the rails. Mum couldn't cope. Ended up living on the streets. She was out of touch with him for a year, she says, and then he appeared gaunt, covered in tattoos. She thinks she'd been involved in gangs. Won't tell her what has happened. He was easy prey for gangs. And again, people say, well, he made choices. People might say that, but well, yeah, there are different choices available to some children as there are to others, aren't there?
Look, it's quite clear he probably was involved in County Line, and he was placed somewhere else in one of those houses, trap houses, where they're selling drugs, and that was his function, and he was being groomed in that way. But Julia, it's common sense, because I work in this field. If we don't put our stamp on them, somebody else will step up and do just that. And we're going to always be having this. Unfortunately, the danger about the drill is that when you're trying to diss another group of people, everyone who's in that drill set endanger themselves, not only from the people who they think that they're actually dissing, but a wider group.
Yeah, you have to be hard. You insult them and threaten them. They then take it back. It then goes to knives. Children die. But then everyone writes it off. I mean, what's the solution? We've got a minute. What's the solution?
The solution is that you've got to deal with grassroots groups to step in on different levels. about raising self-esteem. That's through the mentoring.
We need
program.
dads to be raising their sons.
And we need people like Street Fathers and the Band of Brothers to help give the young men a rite of passage and to help them focus on when that challenges or the red mist comes down, that they make better choices.
Yeah. But we don't need men to step in to play father figures. We need the fathers to be there in the homes. We know this is a massive issue, particularly with the Afro-Caribbean community. And again, it's one people don't like to talk about, but it's a huge factor for a lot of these boys. Look,